Minogajep Kinawea. Good morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Nalganash. I am the Lands, Resource, and Environment Department Manager at Magnetawan First Nation. Welcome to our 9th annual Indigenous Lands and Resource Management Conference. Thank you guys all so much for being here. We're gonna delay our opening just a little bit, just so that we can all go have breakfast. Nadine has some housekeeping remarks, and yeah, this is a beautiful space, isn't it? Thank you guys all so much for being here, and I'm sure we're all gonna enjoy breakfast, and I'll be back up shortly for our opening.
Minogajep, Nadine, Perron, Indigenous. I'm one of the biologists here at the conference. Did my best to organize our gathering together. And as I've been joking, if you have comments or complaints, please throw them in the garbage. I am a biologist, not a party planner. And we're here to have a good time today, to be together and get together. So inside your name tags, if you're here last year, you might recognize it. We have our student poster quiz. So this is how you win your door prizes. You go visit all the posters that the students have created, find the answers to your quiz, and submit them in the blue tote up front throughout the day. And we're gonna start at noon. We're gonna start drawing door prizes for whoever submitted their quizzes. So the faster you get it done, the more chances you have to win prizes. That's the name tags. We are gonna do kind of a easy morning. We're gonna go get breakfast after I'm done here, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna watch videos that have been submitted from different communities about the projects that they're working on within their communities. So with that being said, we will start. I'll start with the W.I.S.E lab table there and kind of work the front in the buffet line. So if you guys want to get going, and if there are elders here, can students please match up with elders, AKA Richard, and get him a meal, please? Thank you.
In the deep waters of Nipissing lives an ancient species of fish whose ancestors shared the same waters with the dinosaurs. We call this spirit being Mne. When I was younger, I was walking down to the dock. I must have been like maybe 8 years old, and I just seen this like giant shark, and I remember like jumping back and like thinking like, oh my God, there's like a shark in this lake. And my cousin like was behind me and he started laughing. He just said, no, that's a lake sturgeon. So that was my very first experience with a lake sturgeon. I just love the way they look. They're so docile. There's just something about them that I feel connected to, kind of like I have to look after them. I have to be the person to speak for them because they don't have the words and they can't speak for themselves. Like the Anishinaabe, meh or freshwater lake sturgeon have been affected by many changes caused by colonization, habitat, or environmental destruction and resource extraction. As resilient as they are, these fish, who have played such a central role in the ecosystem of Lake Nipissing and in our culture, are facing extinction. Mne lived in harmony alongside our ancestors for millennia. The Sturgeon clan is one of many governance clans respected by the Anishinaabe. Our elders say that Nipissing people have always relied on lake sturgeon year-round as a food source. Pre-colonization, we harvested meh with spears and nets or by setting snares along our shores. Not only did we boil, bake, and smoke lake sturgeon, we enjoyed sturgeon eggs. Meh was also recognized as a special medicine eaten by our women in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy to provide a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids to both mother and child. Not so long ago, members of our community could watch sturgeon jumping and splashing along the shore right in front of homes in Garden Village. Juveniles could be seen as they followed the older adult sturgeon towards their annual spawning site below Sturgeon Falls. My aunt, her siblings, and friends remember this clearly from their childhoods. Jumpers range from 50 to 200 pounds. Jumping sturgeon are no longer seen by members of our community and have not been seen jumping for more than 50 years. Beginning in the late 1800s, settler populations proceeded to decimate Lake Nipissing's lake sturgeon through commercial fishing. In 1991, the commercial sturgeon fisheries were finally closed on Lake Nipissing in a renewed effort to protect what was left of their greatly diminished populations began. Today, threats include dams, habitat fragmentation, invasive species, knowledge gaps, and not knowing or understanding the species. In 2005, Environment Canada classified lake sturgeon in the Nipissing watershed as a species of special concern. The following year, in 2006, lake sturgeon were reclassified as threatened. Later, in 2017, lake sturgeon became listed as endangered in all of the Great Lakes Upper St. Lawrence River populations, to which our Nipissing watershed belongs to. Though resilient and protected, these ancient relatives of the deep waters experience serious, continuous threat. Anishinaabe have always been stewards of our waters, and our people still continue to try and protect sturgeon living in Lake Nipissing. The Department of Natural Resources at Nipissing First Nation is currently researching meh and their different habitats, especially their spawning areas. It is evident that without positive human intervention and care, lake sturgeon will no longer continue to exist. As part of our initiative, we have come to rely on citizen scientists, our valued community members, to help us keep our data collection as accurate as possible. If at any time you incidentally catch a sturgeon with a tag on it, please record or photograph the tag before returning the sturgeon back to the water. Then call Nipissing First Nation Natural Resources Department at 705-753-2050 to let us know of the sighting. This simple action supports the vitality of meh. Our waters are also their waters. Their future is our future. We have always been and will always be connected.
Este encuentro pues me hace ver que entre culturas diferentes siempre va a haber una conexión, algo que nos va a unir, un tema en común, el tema que nos une como un mundo.
El proyecto One Water o Somos Agua reúne a 4 comunidades indígenas, la Raramuri, la Wixárika y la Mazateca, y en Canadá es Nipissing First Nation, que está en la provincia de Ontario. Y también involucra a 3 organizaciones, Isla Urbana, la Universidad de Toronto y Canadian Shield Consultants.
Vas aprendiendo que se pueden hacer muchísimas cosas. A lo mejor podríamos cambiar nuestra vida en un futuro a través de estos conocimientos, porque pues si los llevamos allá a la sierra, pues sería un gran cambio.
Este primer encuentro de intercambio de experiencias y saberes de pueblos indígenas gira en torno, por supuesto, a intercambiar técnicas e ideas de cómo manejar el agua físicamente mejor en las comunidades, pero también es cómo empezar a tejer una reconceptualización del agua como algo sagrado, como algo que nos une a los seres humanos.
Well, in Nipissing First Nation, water is essential to our community and the way that we live. From the wildlife that it supports in our giant wetlands to the fish that we harvest that also bring an economic value to our people also through the commercial fishery.
Lo más importante es que este encuentro pues somos hermanos indígenas en donde pues cada quien tenemos diferentes culturas, tradiciones, pero creo que hay una cosa que nos une a todos, que nos está haciendo familia, que nos está haciendo compañero, que es el agua.
Y el objetivo es intentar intercambiar saberes alrededor del agua y en particular exportar esta experiencia que tiene México con el proyecto de Isla Urbana, exportar esos aprendizajes a Canadá para mejorar la situación de comunidades indígenas respecto al agua.
Lo que más me gustó es conocer el proyecto de otros compañeros que nos compartieron. Me interesó mucho que otros indígenas también están trabajando sobre el agua para salir adelante y para apoyar a otras familias.
El diseño del programa de One Water, Somos Agua, fue un diseño generado por varios de los participantes, fue un diseño colaborativo, una como co-creación. La idea era como compartir experiencias, conocimientos, poder como realmente dar un espacio, generar un espacio seguro para que todos y todas pudieran como sentirse con la comodidad y con la confianza de compartir lo que quieran compartir desde los diferentes lugares de donde veníamos.
Creo que sí me gustaría conocer más y aprender cada vez nuevas cosas y conocer a mucha gente que me pueda transmitir sus conocimientos, sus saberes y enriquecerme de ello.
Seguro que venimos a aprender acá esta parte, aprender muchas partes, de qué tipo de trabajo traía otra parte, y aprendimos también. Y me gustó todo trabajar juntos.
Más bien me sentí como estar fuera de este mundo y tener la mente en blanco para hacer nuevas cosas, para socializarme más.
Los 3 primeros días son en la Ciudad de México, donde estamos visitando lugares de interés cultural, como el manantial de Chapultepec, también la zona chinampera, donde podemos observar no solo un sistema de captación de lluvia, sino también similitudes con el lago en el que está situado Nipissing, en Canadá. Y también realizamos una serie de talleres más allá de las palabras para conectarnos, ¿no? Para sentir, para crear esa comunión entre personas.
Y poder como reconocer y darle valor a ese estar todos y todas juntos en torno a este elemento que es sagrado y que nos hace ser a todos.
We know that water is the carrier of memories. Water knows everything about us. In our Anishinaabe beliefs, water comes from the third realm in creation. First we have the earth realm, and then we have the sky realm, and then we have the water realm, and then we have the spirit realm. And so in our journey to the earth realm, we pass through all of those different realms. And for us, that is where all life comes from.
Y luego el diseño fue pensado para hacer un viaje, viajamos a Oaxaca, entonces nos movimos a la ciudad, a un recorrido por el jardín etnobotánico, donde tuvimos una muy bonita guía del director del jardín botánico. Tuvimos como la oportunidad de visitar al día siguiente Ixtlán de Juárez, que ellos tienen como uno de los mejores manejos forestales de todo México, y pudieron como explicar cómo fue que se dio ese proceso, ¿no? Y muchas de las preguntas dentro de las naciones era pues justo la curiosidad de saber cómo construir estos procesos comunitarios donde hay una autonomía, donde hay como una posibilidad de manejo de sus bosques, de manejo de sus recursos y de generar como una economía local. Importante. Y una de las cosas que también fue muy importante es que todas las noches hicimos como presentaciones de cada uno de los grupos de cuáles son sus trabajos y cuáles son los proyectos donde están ahorita activamente trabajando con relación a la captación de agua de lluvia.
Pues las experiencias que tienes con otros compañeros o otras personas que son de diferentes lugares, aunque tengamos como la misma dificultad tal vez, pues es bonito conocer las experiencias de otras comunidades.
Lo que más me gustó de todo este encuentro son las presentaciones de los proyectos de cada nación, en donde pudimos observar muchísimas cosas y aprender, ¿no?
Para cerrar como todo este viaje, fuimos a instalar un sistema de captación de agua lluvia, a diseñar y armar y construir y poner las manos. Al final del día hubiera un sistema de captación de agua lluvia funcional y ¡parán! Que llueve. O sea, vimos el Tlaloque funcionando y fue como un éxtasis de haber logrado en un día pues ya captar el agua de la lluvia y cambiar definitivamente la situación hídrica de ese lugar.
Entonces, ¿cómo vamos a llegar a una sostenibilidad de agua por más infraestructura que tengamos si se le estamos entregando a una sociedad que no tiene una cultura de agua realmente? Muchas de estas culturas conciben del agua como una cosa que tiene vida, que tiene valor y que es en sí sagrada y digna de respetar. Y hay mucho de eso que también tenemos que aprender e integrar.
La idea es que vamos a seguir avanzando en estos vínculos, en este tejido, en este entrelazado de naciones.
Este proyecto, este intercambio de conocimiento que hubo es realmente una riqueza. Ese proyecto de Somos Agua es un ejemplo perfecto de esa colaboración que puede haber entre países. En este caso ya es una iniciativa bilateral donde se encuentran comunidades de Canadá y de México y pensamos que ese intercambio de conocimiento es realmente una fuente de conocimiento muy importante de donde se pueden encontrar soluciones al nivel comunitario.
Water is life.
Nipissing.
Ani, Zongade e Katapua Kwe, Indigenous, Wikwimkong Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe, Wendao, Miigwech. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Jessie Pop. I'm a member of Wikwimkong Unceded Territory and a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Environmental Science at the University of Guelph. I am part of the leadership team for the Rekindling Respectful Relationships with the Land as part of the Indigenous-led place-based projects with the ILREM team. One of our main objectives has been to reestablish healthy relationships with all our relations, human and non-human. Through our work, we uplift Indigenous values, one of which is to involve youth in environmental caretaking through land-based learning, as they are our future. With ILREM's support, we have brought together a leadership team of elders and knowledge holders from Wikwimkong, Magnetawan First Nation, Shawanaga First Nation, Walpole Island First Nation, for a project in partnership with faculty members of the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of Guelph, the Arboretum at the University of Guelph, and the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership. This project aims to develop and implement an inter-community and intergenerational pilot program that will braid Indigenous pedagogy and environmental science to strengthen and unite existing land-based youth education experience in the Great Lakes region. This program will decolonize science, will braid knowledge systems in environmental research and monitoring, will foster good relationships among all our relations while prioritizing Indigenous knowledge, values, and ways of knowing. Youth exchanges will work to heal the disconnections imposed by colonial violence and all youth to connect with elders and language speakers. Using qualitative and quantitative approaches founded in Indigenous research methodologies, we will evaluate our programming to improve this program and share what we have found among nations and with scientific and education communities. This program will build the foundation for a long-term, land-based youth program.
the canoe, even though it's an inanimate object, is still a living thing. It's that connection that we have to the canoe, but to each other as well. One of the main things I do is like in the birch tree. I'll ask that the spirit of the tree, you know, thank you, and would you mind coming and live in the sheet of bark that I'm about to take?
The birch tree covered us and gave us shelter long before we had conventional log home systems. We lived in wigwams. It was the gift given to us by the elders of the Northeast Superior Regional Chiefs Forum that predated Wahkohtowin. And there was an elders council that was working alongside the chiefs who started to lay out or outline the vision of what Guardian program and what our priorities should be. And we were told that the birch tree was one of the first trees that we should be building a relationship with, or rekindling that relationship with, and understanding what the tree provided our peoples.
I started learning this craft with my grandparents. They were both instrumental in teaching me the birch bark in general. My grandmother, she liked doing crafts, so nothing ever went to waste. If it was a piece that came off the canoe, she'd thin it down, and then we'd make a beautiful basket. What really kept me in the game was the messages that I was getting from beyond, and was to bring it back to our Indigenous fellows, you know, because we had lost so much due to residential schools and the 60 scoop. And so from what I was hearing, a lot of our people lost it because they went and hide, you know, and there was that shame factor where you didn't want to admit that you were Native. And as time went on, and the message, it changed. You know, now all of a sudden it's we're using it as a tool for truth and reconciliation. Now through the canoe, we can reconcile with each other. You know, you know my culture, or you learn my culture, I learn your culture.
We've been continuing to try and build relationships and inspire across other nations, including our own First Nations, the ability to communicate together like we used to, work with each other throughout our overlapping territories like we used to.
I think it helps us to maybe return to our role in the medicine wheel, which was become stewards of the land, caretakers of the land. And by doing that, then we take care of the waters.
Wahkohtowin is that rekindling of life philosophy of the Cree people, the Cree Nation. It is a living life philosophy of everything is connected, kinship, and knowing your place within that natural environment, to the spirit world, to the land around you. That's the outreach expected by Wahkohtowin, is to like infuse that knowledge and awareness to all people in the region to create that broader benefit. In building those 3 canoes, we started to realize, hey, we can float all 3 at the same time. And when's the last time has that been done? Probably in over 100 years.
So my job right now is to bring this craft back to our people. And by doing so, they'll develop a sense of pride and unite amongst the community and take care of the earth. And by taking care of the earth, you take care of yourself.
The fish are very important to our people. They fed us a long time ago when we didn't have the grocery store here to feed us.
All of my life, fishing has been a huge part of our family, and it's not just the harvesting of fish, but also trying to do our best and sustain the fish population, so protecting.
I think that fish can be a sustainable source of food for our community, and it really brings people together when people spear them together down at the river.
And now that the hatchery is running, it's going to be meaning that our grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will see the fish thrive and use it the same way we did.
Our people have a strong sense of responsibility towards the land and the water because we are part of the land. We are the caretakers of this land, the stewards of the land, and we feel responsible for it because we have to take care of it for the next 7 generations. My name is Magnetawan. I'm from Shawanaga First Nation, and I am the hatchery operator. The water to me is very significant. I mean, I grew up on the water, and my dad was a guide, and he went hunting and fishing with all sorts of people, and that's another way that we were able to sustain our family. The hatchery, we start out with getting our monitors down to the river when the spawning season begins. And what they will do is they will monitor all fish that are taken out of the river during the harvest season, and they will take down the length, the width, the sex, the time of day, you know, when the date that the fish was harvested. And on every other day, we will harvest eggs from the females, harvest some males, and fertilize the eggs. We'll make sure that they're water hard, which takes about 45 minutes. We'll take it to the hatchery, and we'll put them in incubation jars where they'll stay for about, say about 15 days or 125-degree days. The fry will hatch, and when we release the fry back into the wild.
Any of the fish that we take, we put back their eggs and their milt and stuff like that in. As far as I can think back, it's been going on forever. So it's not a traditional thing. It's just something that's a part of daily life. You know, I guess it was probably around 2002. M&R was trying to tell us that we weren't doing the proper things, and what we did wasn't really helping the stock come back to the First Nation. And so we said, yeah, we've been doing this for forever. You know what I mean? And the stock's right there. There's proof. And they said, no, you guys are mixing it wrong. We do it our way. And so then he thought of an ideal, and with a few other of the members, and they came up with a solution. Well, let's start our own hatchery. So to see if our way is working. So we did it exactly the same way. We would spear our fish, our female or male, and then we'd mix the eggs, and then we took it to the hatchery rather than putting it right at the river. And then we've done it. I don't know. Within probably about 2 weeks, we had our fry, and they were coming up left and right. And so M&R went and told us, hey, it does seem to be working. So.
Some of our teachings as Anishinaabe people are that we give twice as much as we take. The importance of the fish hatchery is to demonstrate and ground our community and unite our community for the love of the water and for the love of the fish.
Our people have been harvesting fish down there for as long as I can remember, for time immemorial probably. So what we do is we will take our students from our Shawanaga First Nation school, we will take them down there and we will enable them to harvest their own fish for their family. We will demonstrate how to fillet a fish. We'll demonstrate how to take the data for monitoring each fish that was taken out of there. And we teach them all these things so that when they get older, all that knowledge that they've gained when they were younger, they will have all that respect for the river, for the fish, for that life that's giving them life.
It's about a 45-minute trek down to the river. So they're getting to be on the land, learning our land base, but also connecting with the waterways. So much work goes into the hatchery. I couldn't even touch on all of the components that are such a benefit to the community.
It brings the community together because it's a whole community effort to make sure that we maintain these populations of walleye. The kids always have fun, like they're always fun, they're learning, they're always, you know, kids are kids, they'll be inquisitive, they want to learn everything. We always set up a little pool for them to spear their own fish, which I think is amazing.
Get close, get close. Okay, now go. There you go.
Some kids just like when the fish is harvested, some kids like, you know, euthanizing the fish with the stick. You know, some kids just like doing that, but you know, like all around, it's all good. The kids always have fun. Our future outlook is to make sure that we can stock our river and then maybe possibly maybe start selling the fish for food fish for, you know, for people to consume. That way that the program will be able to sustain itself and then bring in its own monies to keep continuing on and maybe even expand even further. We want to make sure that we keep our core beliefs of sustaining the population, educating the kids. That is one of our main goals, is to make sure that our youth understand about the respect of the fish. I just want to say that I'm glad to be a part of this program. It's been a great program. I mean, I started out as a monitor, and then finally now I'm at the hatchery operator. I can remember as a kid getting pulled out of school to go down and harvest with my dad, and that, you know, like we'd sleep right under the stars, right by a campfire, you know, get up early in the morning, spear some fish and head back out. And, you know, it's just something that's always been there in my life and with my family, and you know, going down with my brothers and stuff, spearing fish, harvesting fish. It's just something that I love to do, and so I'm just glad that I'm here in this position. Miigwech.
brittle. Oh, careful. Gandalf! You shall not pass!
This
125?
121.
Hi, I think one of the toilets in our student room just needs to be maybe plunged a bit.
Today, outfit of the day, we're wearing a very snazzy, it's called a bug jacket. So as you know, we have bugs in Muskoka and Cottage Country, and especially on Magnetawan First Nation. So we have to make sure we're, well protected.
So that's the end of our videos. And now we're gonna do our opening, and we're going to actually get up and we're gonna go out to the Indigenous Center outside, and we're gonna do a smudge. We have our youth Darian Smith here, who's going to be leading the smudge. And yeah, so if we all want to go up, and then after we're done with our smudge, we're going to break out, and it's going to be break time to visit the booths and chit chat and get our jitters out. And that you're leading the way. I'm leading the way. Follow me. It is cold. Bring your jackets.
Nahaudash. Aha. We much time, eh? We want to get started, everybody. So I guess welcome back. I am excited to be your keynote for today, day 2. My first time at the MAG conference, the LANS conference, so I'm super stoked, super excited. And so I got some pictures, they tell stories, and I'll be talking. But yeah, I have a slideshow for everybody. But I'll start with an introduction. Bonjour, Kanawea. I'm Mr. Tam Giwin Nagabo Ninago. Quinn Mosque Indigenous. Mukwan do dem kanabjing donjaba nongo dash gagage zagabaga dona naki and migachma migachwenda mumpi gi bejayak gi bejayan gaye amigach gaye abzindayak. I'm very happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share about some of the work and the things that I've been up to. My name is Quinn Meawasige. I'm from Serpent River First Nation, located along the North Shore of Lake Huron. So my community is a part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. Currently work at Gagage Zagabaga as the Northeast Community Relations Lead. Super excited about that, and maybe I can touch a little bit more about that later. But I'm here to just talk about some of the stuff I like doing with the land. I'm like a bushman, I like being on the land. I applied for a job and I put that under my thing, bushman, and it worked. I got hired. I was like, right on. But so I guess I'll just start here. So just a little bit about myself. I'm from Serpent River. You see the community logo there. I went to Algoma University. I graduated with a degree in community economic and social development, as well as a certificate in Anishinaabe from Shingwa Kinamagegmik. I'm a Bear Clan relatives out there. I know there's 1 or 2. Yeah, woo-hoo. All right, in the back. All right, cool. And yeah, that's me with the beaver. I'm super stoked. I love the land, I love the waters, and I love learning about what it is able to provide us, but also like creating opportunities for young people, for community to access these opportunities. So food on the land is big and important to me, and it's going to be a lot about this presentation. And then I'm going to circle back to like some of the work I'm doing, and then towards the end, I'm going to talk about some of the contaminants testing that I'm doing, some of the projects and initiatives that I'm a part of. Story of our river, the Serpent River. That's my community, Serpent River First Nation. So we have a big history of uranium mining. So I'm not too sure if people know about the history of the Serpent River itself. In the 50s, there's uranium that was discovered. It resulted in a lot of uranium mines being opened. With uranium mining, there's uranium mining waste, which is very radioactive, can generate, highly acid, contaminated water and waste that we've had a lot of challenges over the years. So this is the only slide with like I know this is like, words. So right here, just because there's some important stuff in here. So I think a big one is by 1976, all 55 miles of the Serpent River system were badly contaminated with acid radioactive wastes. Acid generating radioactive waste. So an official Ontario report noted that there's no living fish in the entire river located downstream from the tailings ponds. So that's a very real thing. Elliott Lake is the town that's located in the territory. The mining town that came as a result is located in the heart of our territory. Actually, on the lake itself, there's an island, and that's where it said that the signatory to for our band is buried on that island. Elliott Lake is an old, Anishinaabe village site, so we have so much history in that land up there. A lot of it is left contaminated because of the work that, of the mines, and so we're left living with that legacy and some of the challenges. So August 1993, this will date me a month before I was born, there was 2 million liters of contaminated water spilled from a tailing site. And so, that's like not too far ago. That's not too long ago, like 30 years ago, so like that's very real. And I don't think I put the stat up here, but they have over 250 million tons of radioactive waste up there. Some of the largest deposits in Canada of radioactive waste from uranium tailings. So it's pretty, it's a big reality that our community is facing and something that our community doesn't often know about. Growing up, we didn't really learn too much about it. Maybe we did. We didn't actually get to visit these tailings sites. Like these ponds, these dams are massive, right? So I'll talk a little bit about like the stuff that's happening both in community and the stuff that I'm doing as well. So here, located in the territory is an off-grid lands-based language culture camp, and it's located in the headwaters. So, and why this is important, because where the tailings ponds are located up in the watershed. Now, everything downstream from those tailings ponds are, have trace contaminants of radioactive waste. Up above stream is clean, fresh, pristine water. And so that's not touched by this radioactive waste. And so that's where this off-grid camp is located, is in that area, just to be present in that territory, because it's super important that, if they ever want to develop in those sites and the most pristine water that we have in our watershed, this is one of the ways that, people can be actively present in that territory to show that there's still active land use. And people living there never gave up the right to live there. So this is just, I'm going through some slides really quickly. This is a hide shack because there's a lot of like cultural activities, lands-based learning that happens up there. So, we had W.I.S.E tag, which is a language studio, art studio. So, was able to get really cool stuff going on, language programming, community programming, partnerships with local schools and stuff like that. So trying to bring lands-based learning opportunities for people is really, focusing on grammar and stuff like that. So having people visiting and stuff is super important. So, yeah, that's just a little bit. We hosted Anishinaabe, which is an immersion language academy up there, which is super cool. Yeah. The next I kind of want to touch on, because it's really closely related, is the NIMP Youth Collective. So this formed in 2019, and essentially with the intention of creating lands-based learning language opportunities for Indigenous youth. So that was the focus. And, we follow the programming is according to the natural cycles of the land. And so always trying to do stuff like maple, disease bakadabo, this is something that's going to be happening very shortly, so bringing kids, allowing people to have those petitions to those trees. And I think that's one thing that we really wanted to focus on, is allowing people to build relationships with themselves, with the land, with each other, with, family, is super important. So showing them the intention, that we have and that we give through our offerings, through the relationships that we share and that we have is super important. So, maple sugaring is super cool. Like we did this in the school, like, we were sugar people, Anishinaabe people, up until recent times started making maple syrup, but like maple sugar, we were sugar people, like how would you carry maple syrup? You carried maple sugar, right? Because it lasts longer, right? It just has all those important qualities. So I remember we took a kid at the high school there, and because there's trees right on at school, we drilled it, he was there the entire time. And then finally when the sugar was made, he was blown away. He's like, that sugar come from the tree. I'm like, yeah, dude, where were you, man? You know, but like, and then it all started coming back and he got to bring sugar home. And then all of a sudden he came back and this year he is super stoked. He's amped to do the sugaring this year. And I'm, you know, so creating opportunities like that is really allowing people to have opportunities that they might not have had access to. So that's the intention of the NIMC Youth Collective. So basketry, doing different basketry, you know, harvesting, right? So here's some berries, you know, doing language as well, and ensuring that we preserve that language is super important. This is a really interesting story. One of the camps that we had, a basket weaving camp, we had one of our teachers come up. So Anishinaabe used to boil water inside of a birch bark container. And I was like, yeah, right. You know, I will believe it when I see it. And so you don't say that, you know, because, so she's like, okay, we've got some birch bark and, you know, started cutting up stuff for a soup. And next, you know, it turned into a soup, it boiled. And I was absolutely like, my mind was blown. And so, you know, having those opportunities to share is super important. And it really connected, you know, the people, the participants to, you know, the land and being present when you make those offerings. I enjoy when we have workshops, when people attend and you have, say, all the birch bark stuff and then you just assemble. There's something very special about being able to go out, to acknowledge that tree, that being, to put your intention in there, to show that love and respect there, to harvest, and then to come back and then put it together. Like, I just feel like that's, you know, really important to me. And I wanted to create those opportunities, you know, for our young people. So here's just an example of a garden space. You know, this was, you know, we were like, we want to make a garden in this place that was, you know, had some development. And, you know, well, is it anything even going to grow? There's just a lot of rock. A little bit of time, a little bit of care, a little bit of love, and it just transformed the space. And that was just absolutely cool. So learning on growing different food varieties, you know, growing different, you know, seeds and corn, having different yields. Like that's Gete Kosman seeds. So I don't know if people know about Gete Kosman. That is some seeds that were found inside of a clay like ball in Wisconsin that was carbon dated to over 900 years old, this archaeological site. Those seeds, they managed to actually grow those seeds and it turned out to be this amazing squash. And now those seeds are preserved and we got to have some of those seeds and grow some of those seeds as well. So, you know, bringing back those seed traditions, those seeds sharing, seed saving, you know, preserving those very specific strains is very important. You know, we got to, I don't know if anybody else had like things with zucchinis, but like I started growing zucchinis and they just were like zucchinis forever. Turns out zucchini bread is like amazing. So just had to put that out there. Yeah, growing different types of corn. Like I didn't get the picture of it, Bear Island flint corn, which is an Ojibwe corn that's climatized to this area, which is super cool. And an Odawa pole bean. So, you know, really looking at the different corn varieties, the food varieties that we had, and, you know, bringing those gardening traditions, those, you know, cultivating traditions back to our community. Like we had food songs. Like I went to a food gathering in the States and some of their nations had food songs, had seed songs, had sowing songs. And I was like, that's so beautiful to sing to the seeds before they go out. You know, that love, that it's just, yeah. So I was like, we need to bring these traditions back to our community, to our people, like bring those songs back, you know, bring those teachings. You know, it's not just food. People think it's just food. Like, hey, it's just a nourishment. It's so much more than just food. It's the time that you spend on the land. It's the relationship that you have, you know, with whatever you're harvesting. It's the community that it brings together, the family. It nourishes you more than just a physical way, you know. So like, who knew Brussels sprouts grew like this? I had no idea, right? Yeah, cool. So I know it's a brassica, right? It's not really, you know, but I was like, whoa, these are Brussels sprouts, you know. So like, you know, these, and like the kids, they're out there, like the students, they come, they're like, whoa, you know, like looking at stuff and vegetables, and, you know, their reference is in the store and their reference is like inside of, you know, like prepackaged containers, right? So allowing people to be exposed to these things and to be more connected to food and where it comes from is important. So here's an example of a hide camp that we do, hide tanning, brain tanning inside of the shack and stuff. So just some examples, you know, I'm just going to be moving through these examples a little bit. Yeah, so doing hide tanning. Basketry is big too. Like I know the EAB, emerald ash borer is a big concern, and we see that impacting our territories. And I often felt like, should I be harvesting a healthy ash tree in order to make a basket if they're struggling, you know? And so these are the conversations that we're having as basket makers, as communities who have long history standing with and relationships with these trees. And how can we, you know, bring about those conversations around, you know, conservation, harvesting, and yeah, but also to have the stories come out from when we hosted it in the community, people coming out talking about basketry, talking about the different sounds that a basket pounder would make, and you knew who was pounding that ash by the sound of it. So like hearing really beautiful stories like that is, and like the sharing that comes has been really amazing. So yeah, we got to do it inside the lodge, which was really cool in the community in Serpent River, and had great participants, and yeah. Fish skin tanning, super cool. Amber Sandy was somebody who I learned from. So, I see some heads nodding. They're like, yeah, great person to reach out to. And so that's how I learned. And so like, I'm a harvester. I fish, I set net, I spear. I'm just an active harvester, fisherman. And so, finding ways to utilize the most of the fish was like awesome. I was like, this is great. Who knew you can make fish skin leather out of fish skin? Like I was absolutely blown away. I have to try this. So we tried, and being really cool and creative and trying to make it into really cool jewelry or incorporating into, the different art pieces has been really awesome. Like I beaded some moccasin vamps, and these are some moccasins, and I was like, hey man, that's real cool. So like that, it was really an awesome experience. And so part of the work that I do is foods from the lands and the waters, and bringing community, to harvest that. And you might wonder, well, you're from Serpent River First Nation. You had, how many millions of contaminated radioactive waste seep into your water? There was no living fish. Is there any contaminants in the food inside their watershed? Very valid questions. We have these questions. I have these questions. Community has these questions. Is it safe to eat? Big concerns. If I'm encouraging people to go out and eat on the land, is it safe? Right? So this is leading up to something, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, but is having monitors in the community, having people who are taking sampling, having opportunity to send, foods for testing is something that, we're developing the capacity for, building up to it anyways. So creating opportunities for young people, like this is Ray's first moose that he's ever seen, was a part of, and super stoked on the Ray, just didn't realize how big moose were, and was like, got to participate and be a part of that learning experience, and and being really creative about how to preserve food, like, beef jerky. I love moose jerky, so why not? And like, those are jalapeno poppers that are wrapped in moose with like Montreal steak spice and bacon, so I'm just showing community, bringing people together to, be really creative with food. Like, we had a jam session one time where like we had a dehydrator, and we're like, let's make apple chips because apple chips are so good, right? And bringing people together, and they're like, whoa, this is really cool ways that you can create healthy alternatives. And so those are the types of opportunities that I really like being involved in. And so along the line with food is trapping as well. So I'm getting involved in trapping is something that, my family has always been involved in. And I remember younger playing with traps and, getting in trouble for playing with traps. And so I ended up taking a trapping course because it was important, to make sure I do things safely and, really understand, how to do it in a good way. And so, trapping, and I realized beaver is amazing. I don't know why community doesn't eat beaver, and then I started talking to people in the community. They're like, I remember eating beaver. I remember eating muskrat. Could you drop me off a back leg? And then all of a sudden I had all these requests for beaver from community members, from a few of the older elders. And it brought back stories. It brought back, these people used to eat beaver down here. I remember when my grandfather used to come back, a big sleigh full of, beaver hides. And so, but then it raised the question because there was someone who ate beaver during the times of the mine, and then they got cancer, right? And so all these stories are accumulating to be like, okay, is the land is sick, the animal water is sick, the animals become sick, then we become sick. We know that, right? So like, should we be eating from the land if we are worried about contaminants? That's something that's always in the back of the mind of people in my community. So just an example, I like food, so I'll show like food dishes and things like that. I just got a lot of things. So yeah, I'll just, leeks too. I learned about wild leeks and they're so good. So I was like, I got to learn about these things. And fiddleheads because they grow at the same time. And like being really creative and making cool dishes, and showing community the food and the abundance that's out there. you know, because people say, oh, I don't know, you know, different seasonal harvesting. And so bringing community out there to harvest it, but then, okay, you harvested the food. Now what? How do you prepare it? How do you cook it? So, you know, allowing people to come together to share in those experiences. Like there's my sister speared her first walleye, and you know we made a nice dish together, you know, so like, and she remembers that. She's super proud, and like, you know, I'm super proud, you know. She's quite the bush butt, that one. Yeah, and like I like ramen too, so I was like, you know, why not make a ramen dish, right? There's some wild mushrooms, you know, and like I got into foraging mushrooms in a really funny way. It was actually like a Facebook group that was like, look at all these mushrooms, and like being in the bush all the time, I'm like, that's a cool looking mushroom, and like there's another one, like there's another one over there, right? So seeing all these mushrooms, taking pictures of them, I just admired them. And this Facebook page was IDing them, and then people were eating these mushrooms. I'm like, whoa, I seen like about 100 chanterelles, and I didn't know what they were, and then I realized that they were edible, and then I ate them, and they're now one of my favorites. And then I'm like, so, you know, trying to show people that. And for a lot of people in my community, youth, they're like, oh, I don't know, mushrooms, you know, I get it, you know, same, me too. But different ways to go about it, like even eating a leek, you know, showing people like, you know, you can eat that, that's so good, you know, and so reconnecting people with that place and with that food has been really, really amazing. So again, you know, just the seasonal berries, always berry picking. And a lot of the work that, you know, I've been involved in has been around, you know, preserving the language around it. Because a lot of this vocabulary you don't often find in Ojibwe dictionaries, and they're very specific to the task, you know. So I found like if we're not actively doing these, you know, activities, we're not verbing, you know, actioning these actions, we can lose that vocabulary. So by actively doing these, we're verbing these words back into existence. We're bringing life to them. And so that's why it's really important to like preserve a lot of that vocabulary so that it is preserved. So just another example, I know there's a lot of food, like bush, food from the land and stuff like that, but that's what's passionate. That's what I'm passionate about. And that's what's important to me. Making sure that we have access to healthy foods, you know. Fish. And then I love fishing. I'm a fisherman. So I was like, oh, I just love experimenting with like different recipes of fish. And so, you know, it's just something that I'm really involved in. And, you know, getting our community, dropping fish off to elders has been really great too. So hearing their stories. We did a net setting event underneath the ice. Here's just a little drone shot. Is it working? Yeah. So we're on the north shore of Lake Huron in the Whales Back Channel. You know, we do target walleye. That is the species. And so, you know, this having opportunities for community members to harvest in the wintertime is important too. So, but bringing harvesters together to talk about, you know, good harvesting practices, you know, stewardship, what is subsistence harvesting looks like, what's sustainable harvesting. So having these conversations has been, you know, what's been very beneficial about, you know, bringing community together like this. So again, there's the kids, super excited, pulling up the net, pulling the fish out. And we flayed the fish right there, and, you know, packaging the fish. And then that young Quezans there, she went and knocked on the door and was like, here's the fish, you know, to the elders, right? To do that at that age is precious, you know. So I talked about, you know, being a fisherman. So when I was younger, like I speared, I set net, you know, I was always fishing, and I was like, we're always taking. And of course, we always put our offering of tobacco down. But I just was like, we're just always taking. I feel like we can give back in a way. How can we give back? And I've always had this dream of having a hatchery. I said, yeah, I would love to have a fish hatchery, you know. And so the first time I seen a micro fish hatchery was in B. Dobbins School in Sagamok. And I had 2 Bell incubator jars inside the classroom. And I was like, that's so cool. Well, at least 7 years later, I had, you know, come across some support, and I actually purchased 2 of these micro hatcheries. And so there's one inside the local high school. There's one in the community. So we hatched 3 species so far. I just got them last year, so we've only been one full cycle: brook trout, lake trout, and walleye. So, and yeah, some of the students who've been able, like, this is for the kids. Like it's for, you know, while it might, you know, put fry back into the water, ultimately the goal is to allow young people to have hands-on experience of like, how do we have an active role within our ecosystem? How can we support the species that are providing to us? How can we have that reciprocity? And so when it's in the school, there's one student who's now taking fish and wildlife, you know, had no idea what they wanted. As soon as the hatchery came in, that's all they knew. They found their purpose. And I was like, okay, we're doing something right. So there's the hatchery, real cool. real tiny, real fits in the thing. And so they're amazing. And so this year I got a fyke net. Yeah, there's lots to talk about this. I don't know how much time I have. Does someone? I don't know. Okay, cool. I was just at a walleye culture symposium past 2 days in Toronto, and I learned that they were able to track fry. Like, I don't know, for those who don't know about fry is as soon as the egg hatches, and it's like you know, it's a fish, but it's like a larvae, right? And it's a fry. So I'm thinking, how would you track a fry? Do they have micro floy tags? Like, what's going on here? How do you do that? Apparently that there's a dye that doesn't harm them that they can soak inside of it. And we talked about it. There's that bone in the fish that's like the otolith. No, the otolith. They can actually see traces of that dye in the otolith. So then there was a place in Vermont. They wanted to know if their fry stocking was successful, right? And so they did this, and they were able to actually see 3 years later when they did a test sample of, you know, the fish that were coming back, that yes, they were fry that had traces of that, and they came back to spawn there. So they know that it was successful. I was blown away. If you want to get more information about it, I'm waiting, but just ended yesterday. So I'm waiting for information about them because I want to do that and to see if it's appropriate to do here because I release fry as well. So I always wondered, release these fry, are they coming back, you know, or is it successful, you know? And so we do see in Sagamok when they started releasing the fry into their right by the fort, they start to see a return of walleye, you know, so we are seeing it, and it's really great to see. So here's an example of some brook trout run. Eggs are challenging to get to for trout. They have to come from the ministry. They're challenging, but you know, we've been having a good ongoing relationship. Walleye's been really cool. Last year we had a relationship with the DFO, which was really neat. The Great Lakes Laboratory on Fish and Aquatic Species came over with a shocker boat, and I was like, whoa, that's really cool. Looked kind of weird that, like, I don't know if anybody's seen a shocker boat. It's got these long arms with like these chains that dangle in the water, and it like zaps the fish, but they don't like, it's such a weird thing, but it's cool, you know? Yeah. So yeah, this year I got a fyke net. So I used gill nets last year in an attempt, but this year I got a fyke net. The idea is I put it into the river. I can bring the students and the kids in the community right to shore. I have the holding tanks, and I can come and we can fertilize right then and there. And then someone told me, because when I was younger, sorry, this is really exciting, but like someone told me when I was younger, like we caught the fish when they're spawning and we put the eggs back into the water. We're like, or we put the eggs in a bucket, 5-10 minutes later, you get the sperm, you put it in like that. Someone told me that the eggs are only fertile for like 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes. The same with the sperm. I can't remember, it's vice versa. One's for 1 minute and one's for 2 minutes. I can't remember if it's egg or it's a sperm, but like, and it just slowly starts to decrease after that threshold of time. And so the viability of those being fertilized just drops after 2 minutes. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So growing up, we were doing that, which really well-intentioned, but then to be like, okay, there's, you know, they are saying like the best success rate is within 2 minutes. So boom, boom, fertilize, you know, do all that work. And then, you know, you can have fertilized eggs to put into the hatchery. So that meant like there's a big learning curve there. And but we got a good team. We started an Oga collective, we're calling it, an informal group of like First Nations who have a micro hatchery. Serpent River, I don't actually work for the band, disclaimer, I don't actually work for the First Nation. Serpent River First Nation, Sagamok, Tikmikshing, Birch Island, Chiging, Wiki, Wanapate, there's a few more. We all have hatcheries and we're all working together to do our own egg collection and to support each other in doing that, right? So it's really cool. If you want to learn more about that, you know, as it's coming up, we can get in touch and you know, we can see how you can get involved, how you want to come participate, or you know, if there's anything we can share. Like I'm very young at this all process, so I can definitely point you in the right direction of some, you know, really cool people who have a lot more experience. So yeah, we just got to bring the students out there. Here's an example of some of the brook trout that we did release. And we did work with M&R just to make sure that we didn't put the trout into a lake that wasn't suitable. We wanted to make sure that ecologically it was sound and safe, that we wouldn't disturb, you know, any type of an ecosystem. So, you know, and I think that was an important learning experience for the students. We can't just go putting random fish into random lakes, right? They're like, why not? Like, you know, how come we don't put it in that lake? Because it's right there, right? So it was just brought up, you know, What about the oxygen levels of that lake? Is it a suitable pH in that lake? Is it all of these science that you're able to bring into it? So this is creating the citizen scientists, I think it really is, so super cool. The Waterways Collective. So this is kind of towards the last little bit. So this is the Nourish initiative that I kind of, I'm a part of, and we recently became a group. Essentially, like my cousins, my sister, some friends, we paddle. I love paddling. I like whitewater. I like canoe tripping. I like backcountry, and so it's like, you know what, how come we don't have a lot of community members who like backcountry? How come we don't have tripping portages, multi-day expeditions? How come we don't have people that are liking whitewater, and it's hard to get into, how would you get into that? It's scary. Whitewaters, how do you, so well, you know what? Maybe we just got to create something so that we can bring people out for free. Maybe we can create something so that we can create opportunities for our community to experience these things, to visit their waters and their rivers in a different way. So we created the Waterways Collective. This is us here. We did whitewater rescue tech certification training through Boreal River Rescue in the Serpent River. So because at first we were just bringing people out there and their family and friends, and then non-family and friend members were asking, and I'm like, I don't know, we don't have insurance, we got 6 canoes, canoe trailers, we got the PFDs, we got paddles and stuff, but people are asking, and we want to bring them out, but it's just like liability is a real thing. So we're like, okay, well, we have to slow down how we do this and make sure we have all the certifications, all the training, right? Because safety is super important. Water safety is super important. So this is an example of us in that thing and doing the training, in some whitewater, having a blast. Yeah, I remember this day. My drone crashed into a tree that day. I was like, oh, real wicked cool, getting them going down the river. And then I just went to the other side of the river and hit a tree. And yeah, warranty, get the warranty, folks. Yeah. So yeah, and not only do we do whitewater, but visiting pictograph sites has been super important to us. I didn't realize how much pictograph sites were just directly in our area. There's 6 that we can just easily boom, 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 day trips, just in different bodies of water. We can visit 4 sites on 4 different bodies of water in one day. And it's so cool. So bringing community members out to that is something that we're doing. We're bringing young people out to these pictograph sites is something that we're doing. And often some of them are day trips. Some of them are require portaging over multiple lakes. So and often they're in the headwaters, right? So we have this initiative that we're looking to pitch to the Robinson-Huron Treaty Secretariat, the Magnetawan, is to be like, when's the last time we had community members in every single of their headwaters? Because I know for me, we live along the mouth of the river, towards the mouth. When's the last time people have been up in the headwaters of their territory, which is where they often spent prior to the creation of the reservation system? Before we were forced onto reserves, people wintered up in the headwaters, up in the watershed. They spent their entire, there's this word in the language called sewedik, and that's people just didn't settle in one spot. They moved rotationally throughout the year, right? So they lived throughout the territory. And so when we started, talking about this, well, why don't we approach a community once we get trained and certified and be like, we will train and certify your young people and people in your community. We will take out the maps. We will bring in the elders, have community feasts, and we'll get them to identify very important sites on these maps. And then we will bring those community members to those sites so that now that their community members have living oral history, you're essentially building the oral history in that community by having people who are physically at those places. So then it's direct land use and occupancy because you're demonstrating people are there. And so they are present. We are there. So it's been really cool to be able to do that. It's a cool initiative that we're looking to do, but we just want to make sure we're certified first so that we can, do it in a safe way. So yeah, just some more pictures of our portaging. And, we didn't have the canoes until the end of the season last year. So we finally got our canoes. And then it has been, really cool. I don't think we have an early picture of our canoes just yet. But yeah, something else we want to do, because we're visiting pictograph sites, is I seen this actually as a Facebook ad, and it was just weird, must know me, but the Magnetawan River, right? And so the Magnetawan River, there's an old red ochre cave there where they got that ornament, that paint for the pictographs. There's a cave there. That's the cave. And so I was like, I need to get there because we're visiting all these pictograph sites, but maybe we should go to a place where the paint origin, where the origins of paint come from, you know? Like, where do you find the paint? What's the makeup of it? These are questions that we have, but at least we got to come here. So we paddle along the Mattawa, and Great Lakes Culture Camp provided us with the boats. So I wanted to put a plug for them. They're super great, super amazing. Check them out. And so, yeah, we got to see where the, you know, one source of where that paint came from. I was absolutely blown away. So, you know, we're always looking for different trips, like, you know, to do, you know, this is along the Mattawa, you know, so always looking for cool stuff, eh? So, Minomen Ke Win, you know, so that's something that, you know, we're actively a part of now. We had wild rice in our community, in our territory. In the Mississauga, you see it, and the Spanish, you see it. You know, there's traces of it all over, but it was struggling. And we're like, well, you know what? Why can't our community have rice Minomen back to our community? You know, what's stopping us? It's like, well, you know, it's resources, people, interest. You know, like, well, I like wild rice. Do you guys want to try it? Okay. Buy wild rice from the store. You're just thinking it's gonna work like that. It doesn't work like that. So you have to buy green seed wild rice that's been harvested. You have like 5 days up to a week, ideally shorter, to reseed it back into the water, keeping it hydrated in the meantime. So buying rice from the store isn't actually effective. So just people want to get into it. Like, I'd love to chat more about it, because like I'm still learning. So we went down to Curve Lake, Black Duck Wild Rice, made an offering, met the people to the land, met the rice, and then it was determined it was suitable enough, and we brought the rice back to our community. And so this is on the left, is down in Curve Lake. The right is back up in our territory. And so we didn't know how it was going to take. We didn't know how it was going to go. I was nervous. Like, oh, we just put the love out there. We just put the intention out there, and whatever happened, happened. So I was like, okay, let's take this. Yeah, I had a GoPro, and I was like, you know, let's see what it looks like from down under. So this is us reseeding it back, and it looks so cool. I think this is just the coolest shot ever. Like, those are wild rice just coming down to be reseeded, and it's just like, I was like, right on, cool, this is awesome. So when we did the reseeding, there's 2 spots, I'll talk about it, but there was 2 canoes. One canoe had a big thing of wild rice, the other canoe had a big thing of wild rice, and we just went along, rice on that side, paddle, rice on this side, 2 paths of a canoe. So that's the wild rice that came up. So that right there, that exact location is right where those canoes are. So it came up, and this was just a test. And so, you know, this is just like super cool. You can see the path of one canoe, right? Those are our yellow canoes, the canoes that we got through the waterways. So this is the stuff we have orca training this year to become instructors for orca is the plan, so that we can certify people. Yeah, so we were super excited. So here is the larger drone shot. You can see one canoe. You can see the canoe on the other side, right? So there's 2 canoes, so it's viable. And the rice you don't see, spread it throughout here, like just patchy all the way through that stuff that's loaded. So like all of that, even out here, all of you guys, all along the shore, it's absolutely amazing. So we are super excited. Like I remember paddling up to it. Like, this is a lake that doesn't have boat access, so it's really, you know, I remember paddling to it, and I didn't have my roof racks for some reason, so I couldn't bring the canoe, so I stuffed a kayak in the back of the thing, and it worked. But I remember paddling by myself to it and seeing the rice. I was just real ugly crying, you know, just like, you know, and like I was just like, oh my God. So this is part of, you know, the legacy of our community now, like, you know. So, and yeah, community. And then we had a day where we brought community out to the rice. So we had them, you know, paddle, you know, and like people came out and everybody was excited. Everybody is invested into protecting this wild rice now. Everybody wants to come back every year. We're talking about wild rice gatherings, you know, like we're just talking, and it's created so much excitement in the community. Yeah. So, yeah. Contaminants testing. So where that location was, that was actually in the Serpent River. So was downstream from the tailings, downstream from their waste. So the sediment is what we're told has trace contaminants and sediment. And so we were worried, and maybe we jumped too high. We were just too excited and didn't consider this, but like, would any type of contaminants to bioaccumulate inside of the rice? I don't know. And so that was a lingering question. You know, we applied to a grant through the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources and a collaboration with One Drop Foundation to do some testing on contaminants. They were specific to water, but they're like, hey, you know, for us, water is more than just water. Water is a lot of things, and things that live in water, food that's from water, like, you know, the quality of water is also quality of the things that live there as well. So like, could we be very specific? And they're like, yeah, of course. So we sent out some samples of that wild rice to be tested through Trace Labs. So we got a collaboration with Trace Labs, Transdisciplinary Action Confronting Contaminants in the Environment. So that's out of Trent University. And so they do testing. And so our rice is in there in the queue to be tested. And then we're gonna, you know, see how viable it is. Now, if there are trace contaminants, then I think we went a little bit too quick there. Maybe we shouldn't have, like, you know, and that's like, we're just community people. We don't have like, at the time, our lands and resources department had one employee, you know, so trying to manage all the requests of chief and council, of proponents coming in, species at risk, invasive species. You can imagine constantly how much work that is. So for one person, I didn't want to I asked them, and they're like, I'm just really overwhelmed. We don't have capacity. That's okay, you know. But so a lot of this is just community driven, you know. And so we have testings, and so now we're wanting to go more than just testing the wild rice. We're wanting to test the fish, you know. So they're going to come up and show our community members and our harvesters how to take fish samples, how to track it properly, you know, do all the things you need to do to write onto it, you know, location, site, time, date stamp, whatever else. Preserve the sample in order for it to be tested, and then we're going to bring the group of youth down to Trace Labs to actually dissolve the sample in acid. Does that make sense? I can't remember if that's what she said. Something in order to get, you know, the results of that testing. So to bring the students and the youth down there to be in the lab and to have hands-on is super cool. So that's kind of what we're doing now. And, you know, it just rose like the conversation of the need to have like a testing infrastructure in the north. Like, I know that some universities have it, you know, some places do have it, like they're private, maybe some of it be public, but then, you know, conversations with the treaty secretary to be like, well, why are we outsourcing that all the time? How come there can't be an Indigenous lab that has all the necessary instruments that can test for certain things, you know, so that we can have our own data instead of, you know, relying on outside data, you know. So talking about that capacity, you know, is something that's needed. And then the conversation started around glyphosate and aerial spraying, you know, which is a huge thing, you know, that we're experiencing in our territory as well. And, you know, challenges that we're seeing. So glyphosate testing is a little bit more challenging. There's, you know, the literature is kind of filling in, but it's still, I guess, like there's some challenges there. So, and I was working with a traditional ecological knowledge elders group, the tech elders from the North Shore. And so they really tasked me with like, finding someone who can test for glyphosate. So if anybody, you know, knows about glyphosate testing instruments, labs, or anything like that, like the tech elders are looking to explore some type of, whether it's a partnership or initiative where they can create those. Because what's happening is they spray in forest sites, like places were cut, and moose are out there. So there's stories, a lot more that are coming of moose that are sick, that have these, you know, look like there's sicknesses inside. And so, and they don't know, that people are coming to the elders and saying, well, what is this? And they're like, we don't know. And so they're trying to find any type of support. So here I am putting the plug out there, and we'd appreciate, you know, if anybody had any resources, that'd be great. So that's kind of where I am. That's kind of, you know, the work that I do, you know. So I don't actually, this is an older slide actually. So I don't know if this is as relevant, but, you know, so that's just kind of what I do. That's just where I'm at, you know. I appreciate the opportunity to share. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
We have artists in our community and previous employees. Cool.
Thanks so much, Quinn. I wanted to
I heard you just talking about aerial spraying, and I thought it's quite interesting. We had the TEK elders at one of our, so we're at our 9th annual. I think it might have been like our 2nd or 3rd conference that we actually had them as our keynote. So interesting how it all kind of comes full circle all these years later, but also that we haven't gotten very far. Just gonna leave that pinned in there. And our next presenter is Curtis. Thank you, Quinn. I'm gonna let Curtis introduce himself also, since I made Quinn introduce himself.
All right, hi everybody. My name's Curtis Avery. I'm the manager for environment at Nipissing First Nation, and got a presentation here. I know I stand between you and lunch, so I'm going to go through more on a high level sort of overview of some of the items that we're working on at the Environment Department. And if you have any questions about any of the initiatives that I briefly pass over, please come and talk to me and I'll give you the full detail. So yeah, as I mentioned, my name is Curtis Avery. I'm the manager for environment at Nipissing. I started there in 2020, and so a little bit about the First Nation here is that we're located on the north shore of Lake Nipissing. We span over 30 kilometers from west to east. So from Sturgeon Falls, basically, to North Bay. And we're about 16,000 acres in size. And our shoreline amounts to, you know, based on the surface there, is over 59 kilometers of shoreline, which is important ecologically for walleye within Lake Nipissing and a host of other migrating bird species, moose and wetlands and such. So we actively have to monitor this large area. So in addition to that, besides the shoreline and the lake, we have a large amount of wetlands in our territory that, you know, traditionally receive very little sort of monitoring and attention to identify what species at risk, you know, inventory of those rare species in our territory. So there's just so much to do that, you know, without being too ambitious and trying not to set up for failure, we've taken small approaches to monitor a lot of these wetlands and the huge amount of area that we cover. And us as Ojibways, you know, we are fishing people, and we are from Algonquin descent, and there's about 3,000 citizens, about 900 of which live on Nipissing First Nation. So the Environment Department's fairly new. When I started, I was the environmental officer, so dealing a lot with community complaints, items of environmental concern, writing reports and briefings, and trying to correct some of these environmental issues. But we soon started acquiring funding, and then in August 2020, the Environment Department was formed through a lot of outside sources that we kind of secured. So my department still is now purely not core funded. And we brought in a substantial amount of money to continue the work that we do at Nipissing. And now we have our own resource technicians, Sophia Tor being one of them. You know, we have another technician in the department that works in the lands, and we kind of share. And the thing about being First Nation is having the limit on capacity. So, you know, if it's the lands department, if it's the resource department, it's the environment department, we always come together to make sure that we get our projects done, those deliverables done, and you know, to ensure that we can continue doing great work and growing these departments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our past initiatives, including the Moose and Climate study that we started working on initially. And this was funding provided by the Indigenous community-based climate monitoring program. And basically, there was a whole suite of items that we wanted to look at. So it was the first time that Nipissing First Nation actually, as one of our strategic mandates and mandates of the department, is to identify, you know, concerns that are posed by our members on the moose populations within our administrative boundaries. And again, the administrative boundaries is a concept that we have to use, I use because as an environmental manager, you know, we have our environmental management plan, and that plan speaks only specifically to those lands that we can actually enact our laws on, right? So we want to focus on those areas where we can acquire data and use that data to support our initiatives. And this sort of funding included not only looking at moose within our administrative boundaries, but also in establishing a suite of ecological land classifications within our administrative boundaries. The addition of a climate tower. So we have a climate tower which we will be installing at our current landfill site, so that we can utilize that space in the future years to not only monitor, you know, perhaps greenhouse gases, but also those suite of environmental factors that sweep over our land base. And it's a nice open area, so it allows us to do so. In addition to that, you know, we're trying to use this two-eyed approach, so trying to use that traditional ecological knowledge and mixing that with that Western science, and doing those things, and trying to really inform each other, those two sciences, and the synergies that come out of that are quite amazing. So as I said, this represents the first sort of moose monitoring initiative we had in the nation. We worked closely with Jesse Popp from the University of Guelph, utilizing other research that had been done elsewhere, such as that in the Netherlands, looking at deer populations. So the fecal pellet count index that we actually utilize is somewhat used for other ungulates in other places. And basically, it'll provide a long-term monitoring for moose in various parts of our administrative boundaries. The first time we initiated this pilot was in the Jocko Point Raised Beach Complex, which is an area of scientific and natural and scientific interests. So it's an area that has these old raised beaches from the way the lake had formed and subsequently filled in over time. And each one of these places of beautiful wetlands filled with species at risk and harbor a diverse population of various rare animals and of course moose. So this is the weather tower that we'll be installing at the landfill site this year, and it's going to complement not only other initiatives that we're working on specifically for moose, but also looking at, you know, perhaps response to walleye recruitment because of various temperature variables, or looking at our own set of data rather than using, you know, the North Bay Airport data. We want to utilize our own set of information to inform our own studies. And so what actually led to this moose monitoring initiative was the fact that, you know, as First Nations, we are often the squeaky wheel. But for me, the data is what's important. And as I like to say a lot, you know, the data really doesn't care about feelings. So it kind of gets rid of that human bias in a way. And so when we were working with the MTO, you know, I wanted to see their data on mortality issues. And like, we knew there was issues, but I want the data. When we got the data and we mapped it, we understood that there was huge issues with mortality along a certain stretch of road, right? And there's one thing is saying, oh, there's moose keep getting killed here, and we need to do something, but we really wanted the data to speak. So that's why we chose this area. Obviously, it was an issue conflicting with humans and habitat. You can see the various habitats across the nation with the higher lands and the lower lands where obviously the moose were occupying. So we figured, you know, if we're going to pilot this thing, we're not sure if it's going to work. Let's pick an area where we know we have moose, number one, and where there's interactions between humans and moose that are causing conflict and concern for our members. So we started this project off by, you know, following this protocol, mapping these areas and randomized design on the Jocko Point area. I can tell you the first couple times we went out, I was a little hesitant. I had called Jesse quite a bit to be like, you know, I don't know if this is going to work or not. And like, feel like it's almost like winning the lottery, right? So you're going to these randomized sites in a bush. You never ever go there unless you know, they're just out in the middle of nowhere. This one is fairly easy. But you go out there and you're laying these transects and you're looking at plots, and you can only count pellets within that 1 meter plot. The transects are 150, and every 5 meters you have a plot. So it's like, you know, sometimes you feel like when you do get the pellets in the plot, you're winning the lottery. But you keep doing this enough, and with enough faith, you soon find out that this protocol is working, and it is actually giving us data that we're going to be able to use. And we successfully completed that pilot. Here's some of the sites in which the sample sites that we did. Some we didn't get to, but I had to pull another slide here. It does show the sort of groups of where there is more overwintering habitat for moose, where they're utilizing it a lot. And of course, you're using the fact that you're going out there, you're looking at pellets that are on top of last fall's leaf litter. And so if you take that time and the duration that you finished your study, then you know the duration of which those moose have been overwintering there. And with some other math, including, defecation rates, you're able to sort of also identify a relative abundance, a crude relative abundance, mind you. But what is important about the fecal pellet count index is that the index count that you get creates an index that represents density. So as the density goes up, your pellet index goes up. So it's a very easy tool to measure density. And relative abundance is a little bit different, such as like the number of animals can be very crude, especially with an area such as this where you have a lot of moose sort of entrained and stuck in that area, right? They're not necessarily going to swim across the lake. And when they do try to go anywhere, then they bounce around, they end up going north. And of course, they get hit by the highway. So we really wanted to use this data to leverage against the MTO to try to identify areas that we could work on to fix some of these mortality issues. And of course, the Jocko Point Raised Beach Complex has its own history of forest activities, poor forest activities that have left, scars on the land, including these old skidder trails. And you can see the trees that have grown up in between them. So these are very old, right? And the amount of damage that was caused on the land from poor management of forest operations have changed the landscape. And sometimes it could be for good and bad, right? So in this case, changes to the Jocko Point Raised Beach Complex really caused the water table to rise up. And then you see this increase in wetlands and these sterile forests, these not mature forests that provide abundance of those food sources for moose and allow them to flourish there. In addition to having the right conditions for the food source, the water, and the cover that's required because of the composition of these forests. These are some pictures from our studies, and those, like, for instance, I put these pictures on there because it's like when sometimes you feel like you do win the lottery, and when that stake lands there and you can count those pellet groups. Like, I know it's moose crap, but it does get kind of exciting at times. And then we're also, while we're doing that, we're also documenting, where are they browsing? You come across a patch, and it could be as big as this room, and you just see browse, like all the trees have been browsed, and that there's moose in the area. So we document these as we're going. We're not only doing the pellet count index, but documenting the use and trying to also incorporate that into, planning and decisions. And this is just a picture showing the changes to the area over time. And you see that pronounced rise in the water table with some of these wetlands and whatnot. So the activities on the land have long-lasting impacts if they're not done. And it's more or less what I'm showing here. And in 2020, we recreated the same sort of study, looking at the Commanda townships, and or I believe this is the Bocage township. And then this year, with supplementary information such as our ecological land classification, we're able to even refine our study further by identifying areas where you wouldn't find moose pellets, right? So you're creating a stratified approach also. And we've utilized this, and this project is an excellent project to get people out, because you're doing it in the spring. You get to see the lay of the land. You get to see everything, right? Because there's no leaves and there's no bugs, so it's beautiful. In addition to that, to identify some of our estimates on moose in various areas were fairly significant, and abundance was high. And we were like, okay, well, how do we verify these? So in addition to the moose fecal pellet counts, we're also doing multiple species inventorying and monitoring using trap or trail cameras. And these cameras are set up in a way that you can daisy chain them so they communicate to each other, and then they send those photos up to a home camera that then shoots it up to the cloud, and you're able to see those photos in real time. And it's been very useful where we've seen, 4 moose on one camera over here and 4 over there. So it's kind of verifying our results and identifying if those moose are using those habitats, right? And that helps with our land use planning. In addition to that, out of the Jocko Point, there's a large report written. We looked at various aspects of overlap, right? So deer traditionally used to be Timmins, the uppermost area because of how severe winters are, right? The severity of winter really impacts the distribution of deer. But as climate change and those temperatures increase and become more wild and mild, and we see less severe winters, those deer are moving north and inhabiting those traditional moose areas, right? And unfortunately, those moose and deer overlap in habitat use, and the deer are vectors for liver fluke, meningeal brain worm, and other diseases. So when they intermingle, you have that spreading of various diseases. And in our nation, we have had a couple calls of moose that were perceived to have meningeal brain worm. And when they do get dispatched and put down, we collect those heads and submit them to see if they are in fact infected or not. So we have a monitoring program going on. And out of this, there's a lot of recommendations, and we don't have to go over all of them right now, but some of the main points are, establishing a boundary to protect these more sensitive areas, reducing or minimizing the amount of harvest that we allow in these areas, to even, preventing the building of access. When forest companies go in and they create all these access routes, they're creating access to all these systems, and it doesn't take long before they become over harvested and pressure is put on those areas. And one way of combating that is preventing access into those areas. If you want to hunt, you can go hunt, but you're not going to be hunting from the road. So there's a suite of recommendations that came out of the pilot project that we hope to get to council to sort of work on these as the land use planning goes into effect. So some of the other initiatives we do at Nipissing is we have a suite of pilots that are, including myself, that have their certificates, their advanced certificates. And what we do is we try to monitor our wetlands currently. And this is important for, not only habitat delineation within these wetlands and identifying potential areas where we can do species at risk work, but also in identifying the changes as climate change becomes more abundant. And being in Northern Ontario, we're the ones that are going to see the brute force of the change of climate change. We're going to be seeing it the most. And it's very important that we start looking at our wetlands and documenting these and seeing these changes over time. So we're actively doing that with our UAVs. Fortunately, it's also got the buzz of other departments, and we're being pulled other which ways. So we use it also for road development and creating various products that are used by engineers and designers to identify what they need to identify in terms of infrastructure. And it's just amazing the amount of technology out there now that we should be tapping into and utilizing. Another big part of the work that we do is the ecological land classification. So this is super important because it's a standardized method of characterizing those plant communities, right? And it was developed in Ontario as part of looking at various community classification schemes and amalgamating that into one. And really for Nipissing First Nation, this is like the biologist's atlas in identifying what communities are these species at risk, these moose using for overwintering. They are rough, right? These are rough ecological polygons that we can use in a geographic information system, right? Like ArcGIS, and many of our communities, that is the staple sort of tool for planning. And to enhance that, the ELC was something that was needed for the resource department and the environment department and in the environmental management plan, because these are areas that we can apply our laws to. And again, we can use this for inventorying various vegetation communities, delineating habitats. We're using it for land use planning, also in governance, so creating those policies, habitat protection, looking at conservation, and also changes in landscape. We need a baseline, right? We need something to look at in order to monitor the changes as time continues. So here you see some of our wetlands that we, again, the biologist atlas in identifying those areas that we need to put more focus on. You know, rather than the shotgun approach, we can utilize this data to refine it and really get to the core areas that we need to study. So we've got most of our areas mapped so far, and as the areas come back to the nation, we will continue mapping them. And it's just an amazing tool. And you can see some of how Nipissing sort of developed here, the orange being our more urban areas along the shore, right? And we have huge swaths of land that are more or less our breadbasket. So this is just a summary of some of the wetland monitoring we're doing. So we're using our cameras to monitor the species that are utilizing our wetlands, to do an inventory. We're, trying to get relative, how many species of this per 100 camera days, or, just to identify some crude reference spots for these individuals, animals and species. And it's been a great tool for outreach also, right? Outreach and education, going to the youth and doing these presentations in the school, it can really spark something in people to say, hey, I want to do that, as was mentioned earlier. Another important thing that we're working on is our land use and occupancy mapping. This is a very important initiative. A lot of First Nation research, especially cultural research, that has been conducted has no set of standards. There are no standards when it comes to First Nation cultural research, which is very interesting, considering every other sort of academic, field has standards for doing that. And this is one standardized way of creating bulletproof maps that when you go to a negotiation table, they do not get thrown off the table. And when this sort of mapping is done so that if it ever did go to the Supreme Court of Canada, it would not be dismissed or interpreted as something else. And we only have a one-time shot opportunity at this, and this is why it's very important for communities in the Robinson Huron Treaty Region to get on board with this and really send their best players to these tables to be interviewed. I can't tell you how important this is. Not only is this an atlas for land use planning, I'm using it for funding, for instance, for identifying contaminants in certain fish species that I know our communities are eating from those lakes, rather than, again, the shotgun approach. We do a lot of fisheries research also. So we have a MOU with the ministry. So, we do the fall walleye index netting. We work on our commercial fishery. And of course, our department helps in doing that when we can. Our department specifically looking at some of the tributaries along the North Shore and trying to identify what species are spawning in there and doing those sort of inventories that haven't been done. We have some anecdotal information, we have some TEK information, but we need to start gather that data and have that data, and we're actively looking at those tributaries and identifying new areas where walleye are spawning. So it's been a really great exercise, and we do a lot of species at risk work also with sturgeon, as you've seen with the NAM video, and some of the other things I'll go through. So we also have a program by the department called the Water Quality Stewardship and Response Program. And basically, this is kind of built into the environmental management plan, and through a lot of the consultation with members is, a lot of the complaints on the land with water issues are brought to the department and kind of worked on from there. But instead of, just being reactive to the issue, we actually wanted to respond and be proactive. So looking at, those tributaries that might be causing issues with blue-green algae in the lake, and In addition to that, this project is a 3-year project, and what it aims to do is inventory those tributaries. We're establishing Ontario stream assessment sites. We're conducting the electrofishing, looking at the benthics, conducting water chemistry analysis on all these tributaries to get a baseline. And there are some tributaries where even as First Nations, we have to somewhat hold our departments accountable for not cutting corners or doing something easy. I like to call it the First Nation culvert special. So if you have a tributary and I have data there that says, this is an important tributary for silver lamprey, which are, a threatened species, do you really want to impact that tributary? Or if it's a smelt running stream or walleye habitat for spawning, that's part of the Aboriginal fishery, and we have to work to protect those waterways and not just be hastily and do something because we think it's a quick fix. So part of this project is we're looking at those tributaries. We're collecting that baseline data so we can come back to those specific sites and see what species are changing. And we're finding different species every year in Lake Nipissing, mostly minnow species. And one way of doing this is through our studies on these tributaries at these specific sites, electrofishing, and basically we're just trying to gather all this data to have a baseline and summarize what each one of those watersheds, how they influence and contribute to the lake, and also how do we protect those more sensitive watersheds. But you can't do that if you don't have data. So that's the point of this project. And of course, there's a whole suite of things that we're doing. So for instance, we have stream assessment sites on some of our tributaries that go through the moose habitats, some that go potentially around landfills. So we're monitoring all these chemical parameters in those waterways, in addition to the benthics and the species that are present there and the fish community. And that's important because those fish tell you the story of that water. Is it a generalist, or is it something that is a specific sort of diet that needs clean water to live in? So those index of biological integrity based on those fish species kind of alludes to the health of that water. In addition to that, we're working on a whole suite of things. There's traditionally been algal blooms in these areas because of we have a lot of leased lots here, prone to flooding. As you probably be aware or seen in the news previous years. So to combat that, we are actually working with a company called EM Fluids, where we're introducing this novel technology that puts a small current into the water column, and through that causes diffusion of oxygen. So you're allowing that oxygen to diffuse into the water column, thereby, the aerobic bacteria eating up those nutrients to prevent algal blooms. And we've piloted this for 2 years using an array of these items, and we haven't had any algal blooms, even in warm summer. So it's been an interesting project. And of course, we do water chemistry testing of these areas. But is a novel approach to looking at something to remediate an issue using the natural systems in that area, in that water column, right? So a whole suite of things that we have going on in our area. So here you can see one of our technicians, Lucas Beaver, taking water samples. So we have a strict water sampling protocol. We're measuring, discharge and staging of these tributaries in addition to those OSAP sites in the fish community, because we really want to get a sense of what is going on in these watersheds, right? In addition to that, we have what we call the algal trackers. So these are sort of a new suite of technology where we have 24/7 access to temperature, phycocyanin counts, chlorophyll counts to really predict when a bloom is going to come and respond to that before it happens, to say, hey, members, like, this is high, you should be worried, look at the forecast, and trying to respond to that, and proactively. We also do a lot of invasive species work. So working with the Green Shovels Initiative, we identified how to map Phragmites at certain times of the year to sort of respond and eradicate these areas before they become too overgrown, which is the issue with Phragmites. If we let that take over, the cost of trying to eradicate it is substantial. The amount of manpower required is heavy, right? So you have to detect these things and eradicate them as early as you can. And we use the drone for this, for example. And here in one of the projects that we did with the invasive species center is mapping this, and we gave this presentation at the Invasive Species Forum a couple of years ago. But it was an excellent way to identify these areas and to get out there and try to eradicate these areas. We have plans to also remediate these areas with wild rice, which I'll get into shortly. And this was part of the North Shore Phragmites Reconnaissance and Eradication Program. We use the UAV to monitor our shorelines, so you can fly these and then within a couple minutes acquire massive amount of data that you could then take back and analyze. So how it really started is that being out on the land, being out on the boats all year round until freeze up, you know, you notice changes in the shoreline. You're going by and you're saying, why is that area green, right? Why is that green? And it turns out, you know, Phragmites australis not being from here doesn't follow the same sort of dormancy processes as our native species. So it often stays a lot greener against the native species. And then you end up with these bright, vibrant green patches, which makes it very easy to map using a drone in November without the need of multispectral cameras and expensive equipment. RGB camera on a drone can do this work for you. And again, we use photogrammetry in a lot of stuff that we do, just a fancy way of using science from measuring images. You know, so you got frag and your drones going around, and you can have 2D, but that doesn't help you all the time. And sometimes you actually need to have that 3D. And we use RTK, which is a special word for saying like GPS correction. So, you know, your GPSs that you have, they're probably like 5 meters off of accuracy. And when we do this sort of work, we want to be as precise as possible. So we often use like our ground control points when we're doing our work. So those are measured using a GNS receiver, very high sensitivity, gives you about 1 centimeter accuracy. So when you build these models, they're in the real world. And when you take measurements, they're very accurate. Of course, you need this rigor to create good data. And again, here's some of the data that it produces. And you could just overlay it on a map, and you can actually see that this Phragmites was brought in from, it's probably a contaminated ATV that had launched a boat here at one time. And then, you know, a couple of years later, it's there. So, you know, in this project, we did, there was over 870 pictures taken. We examined 59 hectares, over 4 kilometers, and we did it about less than 60 minutes. About, you know, 1,500 meters squared of invasive Phragmites was identified. And, you know, it was a very useful tool in identifying the specific invasive species within our community. And again, it's important for that early detection and rapid response that we've initiated. So here's some of the shots that we have of the students removing it in the first year. And it's a lot of work, you know, it's not easy. So the fund we've had funding since, and it's paved the way for this invasive species program within our nation. And we continue to utilize this and continue to eradicate the Phragmites along our shorelines, especially ones that are near those critical wetland habitats that we don't want to spread in there. And so the need to do it now is essential. So we also had a very interesting idea on trying, okay, the technique that we use to kill the Phragmites is a drowning technique. So we go out in the early spring, we cut the shoots and the roots so that they're underneath the water, and that drowns the plant, right? And we're saying, well, what do we do with that area now? Do we let the native species come in? You know, but reading through the histories, you know, Nipissing used to have lots of wild rice, and we don't have any of that along our shorelines anymore. So we, you know, through the land use and occupancy mapping and trying to identify where our members had seen wild rice, we did expeditions to try and find these areas. And the hope was to use wild rice to remediate these areas that were contaminated with invasive Phragmites. right? So we went on these adventures, and some of them were fruitless. And one day we were at this place, and this guy came up to us, and we were just pulling our boat in because we went around the bay and couldn't find anything. And this guy came up to us. He said, "What are you guys doing?" He's like, "Oh, we're looking for wild rice." He's like, "Wild rice? What's that?" And my technician pulls out his phone and he shows him a picture. He's like, "Oh, my ducks have that in their stomachs. You know, when I shoot them." I'm like, "Well, where are you shooting your ducks?" And they're like, "Oh, right by the Vouv River." So sure enough, we went there. We came down the river and we found one of the largest areas for wild rice in Lake Nipissing, and that was probably a year ago. And since then, we've been trying to. This is our first year that we really harvested a large quantity to bring back to our First Nation to plant in those areas that we've cut Phragmites from. And next year, we hope to really bolster this and get the entire, like as many people as we can get out to collect as much wild rice as we can to bring that back. You know, and a lot of the lake changes. Like Nipissing is a regulated water body now, and those regulations have caused issues and decimated wild rice. And that's why it's no longer there. So if we can bring that back, you know, it's great for fish. It's great for juvenile fish species. It's great for the wildlife, the birds, the migrating birds that come through and eat it. It just provides a net benefit to the ecosystem, whereas Phragmites provides absolutely zero, and actually like probably a negative benefit. So definitely a negative benefit. And yeah, so there's a news article here about Nipissing that you can read about, and the other water work that we were doing. Yeah, there's the website there. Another initiative we have going on is red spruce. So red spruce is a very important plant species for moose, particularly. They are not around anymore. They were harvested throughout Ontario, so there's only some small patches that remain. And we know of some of these areas, and we try to go there and collect cones every year to germinate. And one of the definitive features of these red spruce is they're vibrant, kind of green. They almost look like a hemlock. They're self-pruning, and when you try to collect the cones, you know, you're seeing the moose scat and the piles of like scales, because the animals are eating this. The amount of food that is provided by these trees is just phenomenal, and it's no wonder that they create their own microclimates underneath that provide habitat and cover for moose. So we have the initiative going on, and especially because, you know, we have a lot of donors, interested people that say, "Hey, like, are you doing any forestry stuff?" Like, you know, some of these older ladies and people that want to donate, rather than donating to you know, David Suzuki, where they might plant some trees somewhere in BC, they want to see something done at home, and we provide a venue for doing that, especially for these provincially rare species. And again, some of the definitive characters of that is the scales that come over the bud, and the hair on the needles themselves, and the bark. And the cones are more egg shaped. So I know this because there's many times we thought we were collecting red spruce and they weren't. But when we did find the red spruce, and we compared them, and we worked with the ecologists, we knew what we have, and we have plans to get them barcoded and identify those as well. So those are the seeds and the germination process that we have going on now. So we're actively growing these in Nipissing. And the last kind of project I want to talk about is the One Water project. So the One Water project was an interesting one that we were awarded with this year. It was over $200,000 to work on this resilience in rainwater harvesting. It's called the One Water project, and it works with 3 other Indigenous communities in Mexico: the Wairatika, the Ramari, and the Chichewayan Indigenous communities. All have huge different relationships with water compared to us, but regardless, we all face the same issues when it comes to water. This project is working with Isla Urbana, Canadian Shield Consultants from Toronto, and Canadian Shield Consultants from North Bay, and the Toronto Centre for Global Engineering, the capstone students who are working on designing these for our climate in our area. And what we hope to do is really raise the awareness of rainwater harvesting, and that reviving this relationship with water that we've often forgotten about, you know. And you might be asking, like, why, right? Why rainwater? But there's in Mexico City, you know, there's 25 million people in the city, and there's still 250,000 of people that don't have access to water. And in addition to that, you know, power is intermittent, so water isn't always right there for them to have, you know. The city itself is built on a lake that was drained after the Spanish conquered Tenochtitlan, which was the biggest Aztec city, probably one of the biggest cities in the world at the time. And what happened is they used water instead of the Aztec, who had been part of the cycle, who had, you know, floating gardens and would transect their city through canoes and canals. The Spanish kind of put themselves in the center and of the universe, and we're not part of that cycle anymore. And because of that, the lake was drained, and now there's flooding, and the flooding that goes through the drainage systems can become contaminated, and this contamination goes into the aquifer. And 30% of Mexico City gets their water from the aquifer, right? And as they pull the water out of the aquifer, the city sinks, and it's sunk as much as 10 meters over the past 100 years. And you can see some of the old colonial buildings sinking into the ground. And in addition to that, rainwater harvesting can help replenish those needs for water when the aquifer is depleted. And unfortunately, right now, there is a water scarcity in Mexico, where there is concern that, you know, by June this year, there may not be enough water to supply that. And one of the most amazing things that I found, you know, in Mexico is we have huge pipelines that pipe oil, right? But these guys have huge pipelines that pump water over 150 kilometers, sometimes a kilometer up a mountain and over. The amount of power that's required to do that, they say, is equivalent to a city of 1.5 million. The amount of power that goes into providing water to that city is substantial. So Isla Urbana is trying to find ways in which we could introduce this or utilize this as infrastructure, normalize it in an area that it's needed. In Canada, we have a lot, you know, we have abundance of water, and it's amazing because I can get on a boat and travel for an hour on water, right? And the problem is that maybe we think we have it too good, and it's obviously the case when we have, you know, issues with grassy narrows and industries that have polluted entire watersheds, probably thinking, you know, because it's fine, there's lots of water, right? But it's creating issues, and people can't drink the water. And still in Canada and in Ontario, we have the most drinking water advisory still in Canada. And being up in the north, you know, we face the biggest changes in climate change. You know, as much as 3 degrees in the next 25 years, this mean annual surface temperature. And I can tell you, this is not like conspiracy. It's very true. It was only, what was it, 2 days ago, where it went from 10 degrees to minus 20 at our place. So it's amazing, these swings that are coming, and we're going to feel that the most, right? Even we're going to have a drying effect, even though we're going to get more precipitation. We've been getting more precipitation. Probably it's been 70 in North Bay anyways. More precipitation has been falling, but it's falling in shorter periods of time, right? So you're getting these huge downpours, and even in face of more precipitation, we're going to have a net drying effect on the area. So water scarcity, water pollution, blue-green algae in industry, you know, is even here in Sudbury, right? Issues with the smokestack and water quality, and the fish, the species that relied on that, and the aluminum loading because of these acid effects, right? So even though we have plenty of water, we may take that for granted, and it may not be too long in the future before we actually have a water scarcity issue. And a lot of people used to drink the water from Lake Nipissing, but don't anymore, right? So these are things that it's not only just a novel project, but a need to really redefine that relationship with water and focus on the major issues at hand, you know. So when we went to Mexico, we spent 3 days in Mexico City. We went to Oaxaca. We stayed there for 5 days where we went to individual communities and looked at rainwater harvestings that were set up. They have amazing history. So this is the Tenochtitlan, which is the Aztec city that used to be there. The canals and the highways used by canoes. And here's it in 2023, right? So this is a very cool representation, a more accurate one, but this is what it is. And you can see the bottom left-hand corner there, that's Templo Mayor. So that would have sat right in the center of Tenochtitlan. And what happened was when they conquered it, they drained the sea or the lake and built churches, which the red stone is actually part of the old pyramids. And that was a way of conquering that civilization. And you can see, probably not that clear, but on the left-hand side, the old colonial buildings, when you look down the road, they sink into the ground because the ground is sinking at such a high rate. And when we were there, we participated in sweat lodge ceremony, which was interesting. I couldn't help but feel like there was some connection there that we reestablished that we've lost. We had ceremonies with a whole suite of other Indigenous communities at the Chapultepec Spring, which is a big spring that used to flow in and provide fresh drinking water to Tenochtitlan, that big city. We shared our own ceremonies, the pipe ceremony with our other Indigenous brothers and sisters there. We listened to the stories about how much water is involved in their life, where they spend days collecting water. You know, we didn't not just walk into the tap, they spent days out there collecting water. And just to hear the stories were fascinating. And here's one of the ceremonies that we went to at the Chapultepec. It's interesting because everyone says, don't drink the water in Mexico. And we brought water from from Nipissing, and all the other communities brought water, and we actually mixed the water and drank it. And it was fine for me, but one of our delegation was actually from the water treatment plant. And she had some reserved feelings about drinking that for sure. But she did anyways. And yeah, so we went to there's a botanical garden in Oaxaca that is an old colonial building that's just been turned into this massive rainwater harvesting complex where the water is collected through the roofs, filtered through the garden. And this garden houses hundreds and hundreds of plants from all across Mexico. Mexico is one of the most diverse places in the world in terms of what you see there. You could go from desert to cactus forest to huge coniferous forests that are managed by Indigenous communities, such as this picture on the second, this bridge here that we're walking out in Ixtlan. That's a community, Indigenous community, where they have sustainable forest management, ecotourism, and it's just amazing what those communities have. In 80% of the land in Oaxaca is communal, and you can't privatize it, which is just amazing. And they're so self-sufficient. I can't help but thinking we have so much to learn from them also in becoming self-sufficient and sovereign. And of course, that's the tool tree. It's an ancient tree and usually a sign of groundwater. And I think it's over 2,000 years old. We got to go through the floating gardens, the chinapas, where they still do agriculture, utilizing the land, the mud, and throwing the mud on top of weaved sticks. These gardens are literally floating out of the lake. It's amazing to watch. And of course, when you're out there, there's also people trying to sell you food and stuff. So they're ramming you with their boat. And it was fun, though. It was a very great experience. And like I said, we got to go to communities, look at these systems. You know, some of these communities don't have access to power. They could go 5 months without rainfall. It was just, they use it for a whole suite of things, and it really provides that resilience to their community. And we even installed the rainwater harvest system at the Alfonso restaurant, which you've probably seen in that video. And it rained, ironically, after we were done. It was pretty cool to watch. Something you had just worked on actually work. These are the kind of concept of the rainwater harvesting. You know, you have your sort of surface that collects the water, you have a unit called a first flush, so that water that comes off the roof is often dirty. So it goes into a system that is based on the size of the roof that collects that dirty water. And once that water fills up, it caps off and the clean water starts going into a cistern. And from there, you can use that cistern to go into a series of pumps and filters, depending on the need of the water. And here's our group here at the Botanical Gardens in Oaxaca, and our symbol here with the other Indigenous communities. And it was a sobering experience, and they will be coming up this year. So we have some big shoes to fill in terms of planning and programming. And in addition to that, we're working on a whole suite of other things. You know, we have the LC ground truthing, so we're going in and actually ground truthing it and refining those code values. We're doing species at risk research for spawning assessments for lake sturgeon and some of these other tributaries that are unknown, filling those gaps, looking at young of the year habitat mapping. Again, continuing our tributary investigations. We were doing a lot of black ash research with the EAB traps, and we found emerald ash borers in our area. We also we're learning a lot from Meg in terms of the turtles and snake work, and Sophia's happy to take that up, and we've been doing a good job at that. And we're also doing monarch butterfly research and mapping. So we go out every year and we identify patches and look at how productive they are in terms of supporting the monarchs. And in the fall we go and we try to spread the milkweed around. And we have a herbarium project going on. We also completed our environmental management plan, which is drafted and will be going to community consultation shortly. And yeah, we hope to continue work with the CEC on some other work in the future. With that, I'll end my presentation. I'm sure it went way overboard, sorry.
A non-conventional way up. And don't be sorry, that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Posters from Elena. We want to give you this specifically because so we have an artist in our community who we're so lucky that she participates with us and will make us things for our speakers. I'm so lucky. But at MEG we have learned recently through the Moose Knowledge Network, so we learned how much of an influence beavers have on wetlands and then there's moose. So we chose this one specifically for you. Thank you. So I know everybody's hungry, but I just wanted to mention that I think I found some themes in hearing about Serpent and the North Shore and about Nipissing. One of the comments that Curtis mentioned was like administrative boundaries, and I just wanted to kind of mention that I think it's really interesting that we have to speak about our boundaries in two separate ways. Curtis was right when he said that we have administrative boundaries. Those are what are funded. That's how those are often actually what is recognized by other people to say that that's our lands or those are where our rights lie. And I just thought it might be interesting based on all of the information that Quinn and Curtis have shared so far about the interest that we actually have in species and in waterways and in other resources that are not defined by our reserve land boundaries. And I just thought that was kind of something so far that I've noted as a theme in the conversations. And Nadine has a little bit more she'd like to share with you.
Yep. Just a few things before we go for lunch. So I will be putting it out on the back table, but there's a little guessing game. So we've been doing our egg incubation since 2018, and we're hoping that you guys will guess how many turtle eggs we harvested this year. So you can put your name and your guess, and then whoever is closest, we have a prize for you at the end. So this will be at the back over there. Put your guess in. And I'm also going to draw 2 door prizes from quizzes, and then we'll head off to lunch. We'll kind of do the same order again of people out, if you can remember how that went.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope everyone had a good lunch and has had a chance to eat and to settle back in. So we are going to be the next presentation for you this afternoon. We're both master's students at the W.I.S.E lab at the University of Guelph, and we're going to be talking today about how our projects weave knowledge systems for collaborative ecology research. Alrighty, so we're from the W.I.S.E lab. That stands for Wildlife, Indigenous, Science, and Ecology Lab. And our whole approach, there's like a wide range of students and projects that work in this lab, but the approach is based around weaving knowledge systems and forming highly collaborative research partnerships to be able to address ecological questions that are of interest to both our community partners and the research lab. To put some names to faces, faces to names. Here are a few pictures of our team out in the field enjoying life, along with some of the community partners that we have the privilege of working with. The lab definitely feels big in terms of the number of students, the number of communities we work with, the amount of space we work across from like around Ontario to as far as the Yukon. So it definitely feels like a lot of people involved, which is super cool to see. So Michelle and I are each going to be talking a bit about our separate projects today, which are pretty different. You're going to see in a minute, but Michelle works with bats and I work with moose. So pretty different projects, but the thing that sort of unites us and is common with everybody who works in the lab is that we strive to do the work that we do with communities in a good way, which means working in a way that aligns with the values of the communities that you are working in partnership with. And those values will be different depending on the community that you work with, and what a good way means may be different for each community. But a framework that we use in the lab a lot as a starting point, and some of our work is also identifying what those values are, but a starting point that we use in the lab a lot is the 5 R's of Indigenous research. And those 5 R's are responsibility, respect, relevance, reciprocity, all built on a foundation of relationships, which is the first really important step before you can understand what the values and the priorities of a community are, just building relationships with the community and the people who make up the community. And this is a really great graphic from a really great paper about these 5 R's that I've cited there if people are interested in reading more about it. But yeah, like I said, we're each going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into our separate presentations and projects, but hopefully this sort of overarching approach will be clear in both of them. Starting strong with bats. So my project is titled Community-Based Bat Monitoring, Prioritizing Indigenous Knowledges and Values. I'm co-supervised by Dr. Jessie Popp and Dr. Ali Menzies. And I'm happy to meet you guys. So a little bit about me. My family is from Colombia. I was born in the States. And about 14 years ago, we've been lucky to move up to Ontario and call this province home. On a personal note, before starting being a student again, I used to work in a few different opportunities that allowed me to act as an educator. Amongst my favorites was working with snakes. I had a really cool job, I don't know if that'll get better, of traveling the province with a team of Ontario native reptiles and amphibians, and having the privilege of teaching folks how amazing these creatures are. Often misrepresented, kind of seen in a negative light. Be able to shift those perspectives kind of sparked something in me forever of wanting to speak up for misunderstood creatures. So now I find myself with bats and pretty thrilled to do that. I can't say that starting this project, I knew much about bats at all. A lot of this has been new. A lot of this has been a pretty incredible learning opportunity, but bats kind of share that same story as snakes. Incredibly important for the ecosystem, but so many times misrepresented as dangerous or problematic. They're not that. And really in general, I just find myself always being excited to fall in love with something new in nature. Whether that's this summer, I learned that bees are actually really cute. To birds, trees, plants. I just have a really fun time being out in nature and learning more. more important than me, really, all this work that I'm about to present on is thanks to some pretty incredible leadership that we have at the forefront of the project, and that is our community partners. So there's actually a lot of people supporting this project, and for that, I'm incredibly grateful. This is a snapshot of some of the people. So we have leadership from Magnetawan, Shawanaga, and Wahkohtowin. We meet as often as we can, float ideas, and it's because of these collaborations and these partnerships that we're able to shape this research in a way that's relevant for both parties, constantly trying to find ways to uplift and prioritize Indigenous knowledge and values. My project is nestled within this much larger Bats of Georgian Bay project that's been started by Shawanaga First Nation. It's a pretty large project. It kind of spans throughout a lot of the Georgian Bay region, connecting with multiple First Nations, and it aims to better understand the critical habitat use of bats while documenting Anishinaabe knowledge around bats and monitoring methods. This project looks at all 8 species of bats that we have in this province. It's very large, and so for my project, I've taken a kind of a smaller sliver of this bigger research. And I'm mostly focused really on little brown bats. One of the kind of more common species, or at least more human interacted with species of bats that we have in this province. And there are 2 kind of overarching questions or things that we're trying to address in this project. And that's understanding environmental features that influence habitat use of little brown bats, while also trying to reconnect relationships with bats. And that's driven by the state of bats, or little brown bats, in Ontario. And in short, not very good. So they're provincially endangered. There's been some incredibly drastic declines in populations, in large part due to white nose syndrome, which in some areas has just decimated the little brown bat populations. They're a very cryptic species, as with all of our native bats. They're small. You're looking at this tiny little mammal, which flies, which means there's a lot of knowledge gaps surrounding where they are and how to best protect that habitat. And then also kind of contributing to this problem that the bats are having, not only are they being affected by this non-native fungal disease, not only are they hard to study, but they also tend to have a bad reputation with people. And how people relate to bats will, of course, impact how conservation is able to implement it. So these are kind of some motivating factors surrounding this project. And so when we think about environmental features that influence little brown bat habitat use, we kind of broadly know that bats can roost in houses and kind of more natural areas, looking at tree cavities, sometimes leaves. Little brown bats are kind of comically, or unless it's your house, maybe less comically, known to have big maternity colonies in houses. So that's kind of something that we know. They like to roost in houses, like to make homes in houses. But what we don't fully understand is why they're selecting certain houses, what habitat features around that house, or maybe if it's a natural area in a tree cavity, what's leading them to make a house in a certain area. So trying to kind of narrow into whether that's maybe access to a certain feature in the ecosystem, maybe distance to a wetland, distance to a forest edge, trying to narrow in what's influencing to live where they are. And to do this, we catch bats at night in a super fun, exciting way. We put up nets at dusk. Once it gets nice and dark, we hopefully, if we have a good night, start catching bats. Every bat gets a little band on their wing. It's similar to bird banding, where every bird gets a band. And this just facilitates, in case the bat's ever recaptured, we can kind of start making a timeline for this bat, and maybe how old it is, how well it's doing, where it's living. And a select few of the bats, a smaller group of them, are going to get radio transmitters. They're super small. It almost looks like the arrow is pointing at nothing. The arrow is pointing at a little radio tag. So you saw in Mag's video, a bat getting a haircut. That's what that's for. So we give them a little haircut. We glue on a radio tracker. In about like 2-ish weeks, the glue that we use wears off, and the bat will largely be undisturbed, other than the fact that we did catch them. And then during the day, we use radio telemetry to try to locate where their houses are. I started this project as not a bat biologist. I didn't think it was going to be easy, but getting on a boat to try to find a bat, just like boating across like the edge, I was like, this is incredible. We are really dealing with a little mammal that does fly quite a bit. So the surveying is fun. And throughout it, when we're talking about developing these projects that are highly collaborative, that prioritize and uplifts Indigenous knowledge and values, that happens throughout. So it's not just a conversation that we have at the start and then we run into the field and we do what we want to do. We're trying to constantly build collaboration into the project, from founding discussions to being in the field and talking to our community partners and asking, where should we set up nets? Where should we try to catch bats? And I remember setting up a net similar to this in Wahkohtowin, and we're setting up the net, and I kind of turned to their species at risk biologist Theater, and I go, so why here? Why are we putting a bunch of nets in this field? And he goes, I think it's just gonna be a good place for movement. I think we're gonna see some bats really moving around. Very early into the night, we start catching small-footed bats, which maybe doesn't mean a lot for like people that don't know bats, but like they're really hard to catch. Like you don't often catch small-footed bats, and that was incredibly exciting. So trying to like build those discussions and constantly follow the guidance given by our community partners is incredibly important throughout the project. I'm heading into year 2 of collecting more data, trying to catch more bats and figure out where they're living. And then from there, we're going to do some pretty incredible stats, and we're going to start testing relationships between where the bats were located to what features around them. And that's also going to be guided through community discussions of asking folks, what features do you think will influence the bats living in a certain area? And also guided through academic literature. So this project's actually kind of fun for me because I'm very chatty, and a lot of it's fueled from just talking to our partners. So being able to have these discussions and understand what features are considered important from the First Nation community perspective, and then doing reading and also highlighting which features are important from the Western lens, and be able to test all of that and seeing if we can eventually build a model that will predict habitat suitability. Our big dreams for this first part of the project. On the other end, we have this other kind of aspect of the research, and that's reconnecting positive relationships with bats. And that was really sparked by by discussions we were having with communities of it being identified as a strong priority that youth are disconnecting from the lands, and that needs to be addressed in the projects that we're doing with community. In tandem, we are starting to see more in the Western literature of biologists acknowledging that the fact that bats being perceived as uncharismatic and dangerous will impact conservation. At the same time, we're seeing people acknowledge the fact that being talked at and saying bats are really, really important, we should conserve them, doesn't really do much to change those perspectives. And so this is really coming from a place of a discussion we often have is, how do we spark something in the youth so they want to be champions for the bats? Coming at reconnecting these relationships from a place of connections and getting to know bats. And so that's kind of the why for this area of the research. And we often have these like big discussions with our leadership teams of, what does it really mean to do what we're doing? What does it mean to reconnect with bats? Was there ever a strong connection with bats? And it comes back to reconnecting to our relationships, this theme that's been communicated often as being really central, of understanding that everything is our relatives and we need to have those relationships. In our last leadership meeting, we also have big discussions on trying to spark wonder back into youth. If you kind of watch a small child in nature, everything is amazing. And there's that connection that seems just so innate. And somewhere along the lines, some youth are losing that. So how can we create a program that brings that spark back into kids? I can definitely speak back to working with snakes. If I'm teaching a small enough kid, it's easy. Bring a snake to a kid, they're enthused, they love it. Bring a snake to an older audience and you start hearing the stories of ill, yucky, dangerous. So that theme of, there being a spark and trying to get back to that is constant. And so what we plan on doing is supporting a species at risk youth camp that Wahkohtowin has been hosting for the past few years. This year, kind of having a spotlight on bats in some elements of the camps. This year, we're also inviting youth from Magnetawan and Shawanaga to the camp, which is super exciting. And so as we're trying to plan and build for this camp and try to build relationships with bats, we've been having discussions with community on what are the most important elements for this camp, what needs to happen in these camps for it to be considered a success. Language sits at the forefront, constantly being referenced as an incredibly important aspect to connection, is bringing the language back. We oftentimes in discussing these camps have a big focus on the youth. How old will the youth be? How many youth will they be? And then constantly being brought back to, there needs to be a connection with elders and youth so that storytelling and knowledge transfer can happen. Prioritizing community values is always at the forefront. In one of our previous meetings, we had someone mention that, even if bats are viewed sometimes poorly, we'll still need to teach the youth to respect the bats because they deserve that. And always being grounded in holistic views. I know I always get caught up in like the narrow focus of bats and like looking at bats, and then constantly being kind of grounded in the picture of, but what does it mean for the entire community the bat lives with if they go extinct? And so these holistic views kind of permeating the entirety of how we plan our events. We don't really have a concrete plan for what events we'll be hosting at the youth camp. Probably a mix of like games and storytelling and things that will just weave all these really important values throughout how we present the camp. And then to kind of see what the impact of it, we're trying to find a way to evaluate the impact of land-based learning in these camps. And we're trying to do that in a way that is culturally relevant to our community partners. And so right now we're looking at doing sharing circles to talk with the youth, what they thought the most successful parts of the camp were, to see if perspectives that have changed around bats, have our youth after this camp being like, wow, I really love bats. I think they're cool. I want to be a champion for bats. Another thing that has come up is the theme of artistic projects, finding a way for the youth to express how the camp impacted them. Those drawings we were super grateful to have been gifted to us. We did a class talk for some youth in Wahkohtowin, had a blast doing it. And then at the end, we're gifted with all these beautiful drawings that the youth came up with after hearing us talk. A really sweet representation of the youth expressing the impact of outreach. I'm in year one of a 2-year master's, so we have a lot of hopes and dreams for the project. And so at the end of it, we're hoping that we'll have successfully co-created a research project collaboratively in a way that both the Western and Indigenous knowledge has been fairly represented. Looking to document community knowledge on bats. And through weaving the knowledge systems, gain a more holistic and place-based understanding of little brown habitat use. Something that can go on to inform how communities are developing lands or how they're protecting habitat for little brown bats. Just something that can empower whatever decisions want to be made. And then also developing culturally appropriate methods for evaluating land-based learning. And lastly, supporting these land-based learning initiatives that are already going on. Communities do a lot of cool work, and so we're pretty grateful to be able to support some of that. That's my project. Those are the hopes and dreams. And now we get to hear about moose.
Yeah, so it's sort of a hard transition at this point in the presentation from bats to moose, but we were sort of thinking of this as like 2 different case studies of how the lab works with communities on questions about wildlife. And so my research is about moose and moose winter habitat. Given that moose already came up in both the presentations today, I don't think I need to make the argument to anyone here that moose are really important, and that there's a lot of concern among communities out there about moose whose populations have been declining across a lot of their range over the last few decades. And so my research takes place on Treaty 9 territory, northeast of Gitchigami or Lake Superior. I work with 3 First Nations, Brunswick House First Nation, Chapleau Cree First Nation, and Missinaba Cree First Nation through Wahkohtowin Development, which is an organization that is owned by those 3 communities. And I'll give a little bit of background on who I am and how I came to this project to start off. So I am a member of Chapleau Cree First Nation on my dad's side. I'm also of settler heritage. I didn't grow up in my community or on Treaty 9 territory. I grew up in North Bay, but spent a lot of time on the land and had a real interest in the natural world and wildlife, and wound up pursuing a degree in wildlife biology. And it was after that that I started to reconnect with my community and with this area through being hired by Wahkohtowin as an intern. And so I worked with Wahkohtowin for about a year before deciding I wanted to go back to school to do my master's, and thought that this was a really fantastic opportunity because Wahkohtowin and these three communities had all these questions specifically about moose and moose habitat, that this was a way that I could go back to school, I could advance my education and continue to learn while at the same time taking on a project that the community that I belong to and these other communities had a real interest in. So the land northeast of Lake Superior, in sort of the southern edge of the Boreal forest, this is an area with a big history of resource extraction. It's an area with a lot of forestry. The combined traditional territories of the three communities I work with are overlapped by, I think it's 9, 10, maybe even more than that, forest management units. So there's constantly forestry activities happening on the lands of these communities, including some practices that we feel really strong negative feelings about. Herbicide spraying is something that already came up today, and large clear cuts like the one in this picture. So an issue that came up when I was working with Wahkohtowin was obviously how are these forestry practices impacting moose and moose habitat? And those wintering areas that moose use was an issue that was specifically of interest because the MNR currently does have guidance for forest management around moose winter habitat. However, it's a very simple query of they're just looking at cover. They're just looking at where are these conifer trees, you know, in a close enough canopy cover that it's going to block snow. And those are the areas that moose are going to be using for cover in winter. As opposed to when we hear from our community members and land users and knowledge holders, they say to us that there are areas on the landscape that moose return to consistently in the winter, areas where, according to some people, they'll even gather or yard together in the winter, and that those are really important areas to protect. And there's more to them than just shelter. Like moose also need to have access to food through the winter. There's certain things about these areas that makes them well suited to being where moose spend the winters, especially during really severe winters. And I just wanted to include a quote from a community member to emphasize that point. So the winter habitat, when they go in and log, they tear it all up and that brush don't come back the same way. Protect those areas. You'll never get them back once they go in there and rough it all up. So that's the starting point for my research, is we know that there's a current way that these winter habitat areas are maybe being identified by MNR, but we also think that there's some gaps in that. And so we're looking for how can we bring those two ways of knowing together to try to come up with a better way of predicting and mapping where are those winter habitat areas so that we can manage for them and protect them from forestry activities like clear cutting or herbicide spraying. So on the Western science side, the starting point that I had and the knowledge that I'm working with comes from those MNR management guides. That starting point is the query that they currently use to identify winter cover. And then on the community knowledge side, I conducted interviews with 20 community members from our 3 First Nations to try to get a baseline understanding of what are the factors that are important to moose winter habitat according to our community's Indigenous knowledge and lived experience. So based on that, looking at how can we bring those two sets of information, those two ways of knowing together in a new model. But to do that, we didn't want to just take the currently existing MNR winter habitat query and add some factors from interviews onto it. We wanted to build something new from scratch that didn't prioritize the Western science way of doing things or Western science knowledge, but that was like really collaborative. Build something that would be able to treat both knowledge systems with equity and with equal respect. And I also wanted to find a way of modeling that would really emphasize the relationships and the interconnection that exists. Relationships, as we mentioned, is a value of communities, but it's also a way of knowing and a way of understanding the world, is that everything is connected. And this is another quote from one of my interviews just to emphasize that. So we talk about relationships. There's a relationship between the moose, the forest, and us, right? Or it's all within that circle of life, as they say. Without the forest, the moose, and us, we suffer. But the forest, the trees, the bush, all the vegetation, plants, everything, that's all vital to our being, our survival. The moose, all animals out there, all creatures. And this is another source that I was looking at to try and figure out how to build this model. This is from a chapter in a book. It was written by an anthropologist and a Cree knowledge holder talking about the right way to model or to represent Indigenous knowledge. And I thought it was really cool. So they talk about how in a lot of Indigenous ways of knowing, like managing animals or managing our relatives, human beings don't really have the authority to do that. But what we do have control over are our relationships. The thing that we can manage is our relationships and how we relate to these other beings that we share the land with. So again, emphasizing the importance of relationships in this new model. And the way in this book chapter that they visualize a potential model is using a spider web or like a web of life analogy, again, to show the interconnection and the relationships, where the relationships carry more weight in the model than the individual components do. And so thinking about that, I sort of stumbled across a modeling tool that already exists that is called a Bayesian belief network. I'm just going to jump ahead to that. So this is what that looks like. A Bayesian belief network, or a BBN. It's like not a very appealing term, especially to me because I'm not really a statistician. But if you sort of ignore the first part and just think of it as a belief network, it's a way of mapping out the way that people think about a system or about a problem. So this is an example with a habitat suitability model for wild sheep, where you can see habitat suitability at the top and all of the different factors that relate to it. And so this is a modeling tool that has been used before with a two-eyed seeing approach. So this is a project that was looking at creating a model to try to predict ecosystem health. And the darker gray boxes in this model are factors that came from the Western science side of things, like fish mercury levels and like dissolved oxygen in water. And the lighter gray boxes are factors that came from Indigenous knowledge holders of things like aesthetics and like water vitality. So they were looking at how to bring those things together into one model to answer this question about ecosystem health. So that study that I cited earlier used a web of life or sort of a spider web analogy for a model, but I think this also fits really well with a dream catcher. And so if you think about building this model as sort of like creating a dream catcher, each of those boxes and those factors can represent a bead of the dream catcher. And the connections between them represent the thread that ties them together. So like in this really small example, the season that we're in affects the likelihood of what the wind conditions are going to be. And so the conceptual model is really just drawing out what are those different components and what are their relationships. But then when we get into the actual like math part of it, that's all based on probabilities. So if you look at this example where at spring, there's 100% probability. That means that the season is spring. There's a 100% chance that it's spring. And therefore, based on, they probably used meteorological data for this. If it's spring, then any given day, there's a 60% chance that wind conditions are going to be fair, a 30% chance that they're going to be moderate, a 10% chance that they're going to be unfair. And another really cool thing about this modeling tool is that you can get these numbers from data. You can look at like weather data over time and get these probabilities from that, or you can ask experts and get your numbers that way. So it's a really cool way to bring both of those things together, of potentially going out and collecting data to inform this model, or sitting down with experts, particularly in this case, Indigenous knowledge holders, and asking them, what is the probability given these conditions that you'll have like suitable moose winter habitat? So that is what we wanted to achieve with this project, build a BBN to predict winter habitat suitability for moose, bringing together the Western science knowledge from the M&R guides and then the Indigenous knowledge that I gathered through interviews. So we had a workshop last summer where we invited Indigenous experts to come out to where I could present the results of my interviews and then also the M&R guides and talk about how do these things fit together? How do these things influence moose winter habitat suitability, and how do they relate to each other? And drawing out that dream catcher together. And then to get the probabilities, we had to come up with a way to do this that wasn't strictly just asking people, like, give me a percent between 0 and 100%, what's the probability? Because that's not really accessible to a lot of people, and we wanted it to be more widely usable with people and also just more friendly, because we felt that people would get really exhausted going through all these different scenarios, having to think in terms of probabilities, and not everybody is as comfortable thinking in probabilities or percentages. So we wound up using dried beans as counters, with each bean representing 10% probability. So we created visuals to have in front of people so that when we ask the question of like, if there's, you know, enough shelter in this area, but there's like wolves present, what's the likelihood that moose are going to be there? And that's just off the top of my head. There's like, we will get to what the dreamcatcher actually looks like after this. But having that in front of people with the different possible answers of like high suitability, medium, and low, and letting people place their beans on the sheet of paper with, you know, the more beans, the higher the chance. And we found that this actually worked really well. And we had some really good discussions with people using this method. So this is where we got to after that initial workshop, and a little bit of tweaking after some expert review. So I have a poster here as well, if you're interested in taking your time and looking through this. But just to go over some of the key points of sort of how this is laid out. We use the dreamcatcher to visualize the conceptual model, but we also use it as a metaphor, where some things that came up in the group discussions at this workshop were about the larger overarching factors that influence like moose winter habitat suitability, moose ability to live on the land. And it was things like greed was like a negative thing that came up, whereas respect and knowledge were positive things that influence moose. And those are sort of the overarching inputs into the dreamcatcher that trickle through, and the dreamcatcher is meant to catch the bad medicine and let the good medicine flow through to some of the solutions or the recommendations that we came up with based on this workshop. And you can see that disturbance is really big. It's the biggest factor in the dreamcatcher because it has the most influence on the greatest number of things. It has the most connections and relationships in the dreamcatcher because it influences a lot of different things. One cool finding that I wanted to talk about a little bit is we were looking at snowfall. So the amount of snowfall in the winter plays a big role in where moose are going to be and what areas they're using. And we were talking in this workshop about what influences snowfall. And some people were putting forward drought as something that might influence how much snowfall there is in a winter, but there wasn't really a consistent understanding of that. And then after the workshop, when I went and I interviewed some more Indigenous experts about this, they said that really you can't predict, like we as people can't really predict how much snowfall there's going to be in a given year. But if you're out on the land and you look and see how high the squirrel nests are off the ground in the fall, or how high the bees' nests are, the higher they are off the ground, the more snow you're going to get that winter. And so that was a really cool way to potentially incorporate not only Western science expert knowledge into this model, Indigenous expert knowledge into this model, but the expert knowledge of our other than human relatives into this model. And yeah, I could probably talk about this for a long time, but I think I'll move on for now. Maybe I'll just highlight that. So like I mentioned, the MNR has that existing query. That was one of our starting points for this, and they're really focused on shelter. So there were some elements of that that did come through in this model, even though we built it with Indigenous experts at this point. So the canopy closure, the snow conifer catch ability, those did make it through into the model, as well as some of the things that came out in interviews, like the importance of food sources for moose in winter, the importance of disturbance, and other things that were introduced throughout the process of the workshop, and then the expert reviews that we did after that. Yeah, just a little bit of a better look, but again, there's a version of it up on the wall over here if you want to take another look later. And so this is a really early preliminary model. We've only really, we had a pretty small subset of people who came out and participated in this workshop and who did the one-on-one knowledge elicitations with the beans. So it's definitely an ongoing process of getting this to a point where it can be used in planning, where it can hopefully one day actually be mapped across the landscape to try to predict where those areas of high suitability may be. So that's going to be an ongoing process. This initial workshop, we kept it to being just Indigenous knowledge holders rather than inviting Western science experts as well. But we do value having that input. It was just decided for this initial workshop to not have people in the same place. But that's something that we'll probably circle back to at some point, continue to engage with people to adapt and improve this model in a collaborative way. Ideally, long-term, we'd like to be able to have a map come out of this to identify areas for ground truthing and monitoring by our Indigenous land guardians. And our other long-term goal is to have a greater understanding of applying 2-eyed seeing in a good way in research, which I think we are sort of starting to figure out through this process. And so to start to wrap up and sort of come bigger picture after that focus on moose and that focus on bats, what we do in our lab is weaving knowledge systems in ecology, which is an approach that is widely applicable and also works towards equity and environmental justice for the communities that often face the most severe negative consequences of resource extraction and environmental change. All of our work is strongly founded on collaboration, essential for weaving knowledge systems, and that's built off relationships. So throughout this entire process, we're constantly prioritizing and taking time to build relationships, get to know people so that we can have that collaborative work. And throughout, just always trying to prioritize Indigenous knowledge and values so we can have these value-led approaches within the science that we're doing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No, good job.
Hi, my name is Allison Carson. I am kind of a fresh face to Magnetawan First Nation. I'm the species efforts biologist.
No, good job. Or I guess, sorry, we're the afternoon.
Right there.
We have to walk up closer. Okay. Let's see.
Oh, am I saying?
You're in front of the screen. There we go.
Yep.
Is that just better? Is that better? Kind of? Okay. Nadine, Perron, biologist at Magnetawan First Nation in the Lands Department.
Terry Jones, I'm the conservation technician at the Magnetawan First Nation Lands Department.
Okay. So we're gonna go, pretty sure we're gonna have to remove this slide at some point, but in case you're new and you don't know where Magnetawan First Nation is, here's a map. This is the beautiful river, so it starts at the headwaters of Algonquin Park. There's actually a mine there near that watershed, flows down through Magnetawan, the township. Very different place. If you've ever been to Mag, you're going to Magnetawan First Nation, not the township. And then it comes out and goes into Georgian Bay. So we are at the kind of mouth of the river where it flows into the bay.
Are you okay? Yeah, so it's just gonna be me and you?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Next slide's up.
Okay, so one of our main objectives is reptile monitoring, mostly with our herps, so like our turtles and snakes. We've been doing that for 12 years now, and we have a lot of data. Most of it was for our road ecology, so things that get hit along the road.
Yeah, doing large population monitoring. So we have mark recapture programs, looking at our populations of snapping turtles, Blanding's turtles, painted turtles, and our Massasauga rattlesnakes. We also had a very cool opportunity with Dr. Litzgood as well, but our forecast with that crazy climate that flooded out roads, but we ended up on the nature of things with Anthony Morgan, where we got to talk to him about how cool turtles are and how they breathe out their bums. So
yeah.
And to continue on, so we had some tracking, we have our technicians out there, we do community kind of observation sightings, so removing anything that's possibly in the way when we're doing development or just in community members, making sure that we can move our reptiles to safe spots. Yeah, and some pretty cool
numbers that we've collected since 2012 is when our first data collection has started, and our numbers over the past 13 years.
Yeah. And I'd also like to point out that our wonderful snake woman, Elena, who started with us in 2019, as where you can see there was a little snake jump in our population where we were able to spend, we had more time spent out looking for those snakes and a continuation of that. And we've learned quite a lot. One of our big objectives with our Guardians program funding is this kind of community connection together. I look out in this crowd and I see a lot of familiar faces, people that we spend our time out in the field with, people that we want to spend more time out in the field with. And it's those kind of interconnections between communities that we've had the government segregate us and put, sorry, I say us as well as a white woman from settler descent working in a First Nation community. Magnetawan First Nation is my second home away from home, and they've really taken me, and I feel like part of that community. I am part of that community. So when I say us, and I'm referring to Magnetawan First Nation and the community, I do recognize where I am and who I am. But yeah, putting those boxes and connecting the communities that, you know, perhaps haven't had those connections and spoken because of isolation, because of separation, because in a sense, a lot of times we're fighting over the same type of funding, metaphorically fighting, and we're struggling for the same pool of resources that is severely limited to do exceptional work, really cool land-based programs to learn from the people who lived on Turtle Island first, who have the knowledge. And so, oh, I lost my train of thought. That was really embarrassing.
So we have different partnerships with our different following communities. So we have one partnership with Nipissing that we went out and did some fish tanning, and because they do a lot of fish, so they were able to get some fresh pickerel skins for us, and we were able to go out there and help show them how to high tan them. We have another partnership with Wahkohtowin First Nation and Cedar First Nation territory, Doki's First Nation.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I'm gonna keep going because we still have more slides about our partnerships. And here's one collaborative project, and we're really excited to welcome Chris Lim aboard. He just got accepted into the master's program where he's going to be looking at this collaborative project between Shawanaga First Nation, Quinn and Cedar Territory, and Meg, and look at how working communally to look at wolves, eastern wolves, over a larger landscape population, how that works, what the community's values are, how the community wants to approach these types of projects, and kind of learning the ins and outs. Weaving science isn't neat and tidy. It's messy. Everybody's still learning, and we're growing. And so those are important things to remember, is that we learn from the mistakes, but we need to make sure that we're identifying, we're looking at them straight in the face, we're accepting them, and we're building off of what we're learning. We're doing the same thing over and over, we're not learning. And then Mr. Pelletier, one of the technicians at the Lands Department, Wahkohtowin, built a beautiful poster, and Meawasige, those who walk with wolves, and I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to have Theodore go over it with me if I've mispronounced that. But those that walk with wolves, and taking that as we're walking with wolves, the wolves are teaching us how we need to help them, how we need to manage them, and we are learning, and because we're doing it together.
Yeah, so another thing that we've been doing, so we just participated in our second annual fall harvest camp. So we go out and we harvest some, well, not so much harvest, but we go out and get some moose and deer tans, hides that we've been doing and been learning the process. We try and get different First Nation youth out to come out and also help.
Perron High School came up.
Yeah, Perron High School, and all our First Nation kids were able to come out this year and make it. We've been trying to do one every year. It's been getting harder and harder with the warmer winters that we've been having, because we can't really do the frost scraping that we want to do. And so it's just learning different techniques and different timing schedules with the warmer climates and how that's affecting everything. So it's been a difficult year, but we've been getting through it.
And not to mention, we've had a few, so sometimes the pelts are donated to us from hunters who haven't reclaimed that type of knowledge and don't know what to do with it, but also realize that they don't just want it to go to waste. If there's a possibility that it could move forward and gift itself on, then they would like that. So, but ticks and the quality of the pelt when we're looking at all these ectoparasites and disease and types of things like that. So having to be really concerned and look at the animals that are coming on the land, but listening to what those are telling us. If the moose pelts are continuously coming with full of ticks and stuff, if we're not doing anything to change that, they're just going to keep coming that way. Those moose are sick. We need to listen, and we need to help them. They don't speak English, so if you're not listening, then you won't be hearing.
So another thing that I was able to participate in was Wahkohtowin's canoe build that they've been participating in every year. I think this was their third or fourth year that they've put this together. Third year, yes, third year. Thanks, Elena. Yeah, so was able to go and help with that. It was a very unique and cool opportunity to be a part of, because it's how we used to get around back in the day on our waters. It's cool being able to go back into our traditional ways and seeing how they were built.
We also participated in numerous medicine walks and going out of the land with teachers and elders. We spent a couple of trips up to Dokis to go out with Anna Dokis to learn about different foraging and mushrooms. And there's a lot of things. If you ask Darian what you can eat in the bush, pretty much everything is there. And so learning from these exceptional teachers who are close to us, but as a very small community, we're less than 100 people in Magnetawan First Nation. We've lost a lot of elders. We need to reach out to our sister communities for that knowledge, because it's missing and it has been separated and a gap of access. Theodore Flamand, he came to the IACS course with Dr. Jesse Popslav, so that's at the end of August, doing another medicine walk and learning from different teachers. You also hear, when you're learning from different communities, multiple plants have multiple purposes, and so depending where you are, you might get a different background in teaching from them. Mipton, which from Meawasige, which is an exceptional, so we went down to Cape Croker, did some puffball harvesting. Terry got gifted with this beautiful ash basket that was weaved in a fashion that I hadn't seen before, which was pretty cool. It's hanging in our office. Yeah, Terry's prized possession. And tool crafting. Brenda Lee has come for the second year to teach us our hide tanning skills and tool crafting and using every single piece down from the tendon that comes down the back of the moose's leg and how that is used to make sinew. And so every single piece of an animal is used if you're asking and learning about it. Oh, and I apologize. Richard Naganosh, which I'm going to shout out even though he's had to just step out for a second, but I don't think we ever give him enough credit for the amount of time he spends with us and how much knowledge he shares without us even knowing. So
another thing that we've been participating in, it started off as a master's program, wildlife camera. So it was about the moose and small to medium-sized mammals. Claire, if she would be willing to stand up. Okay, well, Claire was one of the people that first started the program in Magnetawan First Nation. And I recently, well, they did their defense last spring, I'm pretty sure it was, yes. So since they are all finished the program, I started taking over the program, and we've been trying to keep it going for another 5 years. Right now we have about 46 cameras up altogether. We have about 56. So we are missing a couple. They are a little bit harder to get to as they are across Magnetawan River. So you have to take a canoe across, and with it being winter, it's a little harder to get to in cold water.
the ice didn't come.
Yeah, the ice didn't come. So
El Nino, and where's the snow? And
yeah. So we needed to see how the mammals, especially moose, are using the habitat throughout the winter, and help answer some of our questions: are where they are, how they're doing, and the population.
Yeah, and don't forget about the cameras. They're going to come back in a bit. And so, equally spending time with the W.I.S.E lab. You heard from Michelle and Elena. I think you've been hearing from kind of everyone is that collaboration and the community input and doing it with the communities together instead of for the communities. They don't need people to do it for them. They need the resources and access and space and time to be able to do it. And that's really wonderful way that integrating with the W.I.S.E lab, that type of approach is that it's always an approach where they're forward-thinking for the community and how is this going to benefit them and what is this going to leave them with when the students are done? Because the reality is master projects are 2 years, PhD projects are quote unquote 4 years. And so once those students are done, where does that relationship leave people? Where does that project leave? Is it just done and then we don't collect the more data, which is why it was incredible that Terry was able to get trained to take over that project and continue monitoring and have long-term databases and collect baseline data, which I think was one thing Curtis really spoke to as well. And I hear a lot of themes that keep reoccurring within all these presentations is baseline data, knowledge about the land that are actually coming from community. Cool. And I'd also like to welcome Andy, who's back here. We went down and had a leadership group. Andy is beginning her PhD with Magnetawan First Nation, and she's going to be utilizing some of that camera trap data in collaboration with Terry's project, looking at biodiversity on that kind of larger scale, adding in different species that we haven't looked at thus far. So we're super excited to spend 4 years hanging out with Andy. So you'll be seeing lots of her.
All right, another thing that we've been participating in is the Bass of Georgian Bay. So for 2 nights, they came out and we were able to catch some bass. We were able to catch a layer hairy, or the small hairy bat.
The hoary bat?
The hoary bat.
This little silver-haired one, or is it just a silver-haired one? Just a silver, and some little browns.
Yeah.
And as Michelle even spoke to, getting that community. So we had our community night, we have our youth out there at night, we're all feeding the mosquitoes, learning. We actually caught bats on community night, which was awesome. And so everybody, we have kind of like a tech system, and there's kind of houses around where we're netting bats, and we were like, we got one, and everyone was running out to come see the bat. And so yeah, it was good fun. And
yeah, except for the mosquitoes, getting eaten alive is not very fun.
Start.
Okay, so we've been doing an invasive species management for our Phragmites. So we currently have 3 spots in Magnetawan and the surrounding area, which of course is in our waterway, and our waterway can't really put boundaries on our waterway, even though they do on us. But yeah, so we're trying to do our best we can to mitigate in our traditional lands. And so we first started finding our first one in 2019. They went out and cut it as low as possible. Luckily for this one, it's actually submerged in water, so it wasn't too hard to be able to cut that down.
Yeah, it's extremely successful. So you can see from the 2019 picture up there, that was the original site. So it's not crazy big, but early detection and prevention is the key here. And then in 2003,
23.
Yeah. I think we went out and cut like maybe five strands of Phragmites, which was extremely like a feel good. You know, you still go there and there's all the spikes from all the lasting, you know, frag, where we did the drowned out technique where you cut underwater as well. And I also like to shout out Georgian Bay Forever, who's done a lot of training and worked with us with this Phragmites. But yeah, it's nice to see results, and it's been a long time coming, and it takes at least 5 years of management every year to see those types of benefits to potentially eradicate it. So we also have another patch right next to the train track. So 3 guesses how the frag got there. And then we also found a new patch in the neighboring community of Britt, which is just across the waterway. And we hemmed and hawed, and we were like, is Britt going to be upset if we start going there and like cutting? Like, they wouldn't really be upset, but do we insert ourselves? Do we manage this patch? And we said, well, everything's connected. The water, like Terry mentioned, it's a threat if it's there on our water stream, even though it's across the river. So we went and we've started managing that one as well. And we pulled out, it's on this nice sandy beach, and this wonderful couple came and lets us use their property. And we pulled out a root system that must have been, it tears up that wall like
20 feet.
Yeah.
At least 20 feet long.
From the stalk. And the giant drill probe that came, that is just like a pointy needle, just goes right through the sand, and just, it's no wonder that it's such a hard species to eradicate, that it's so prolific. And those root systems can go up, I believe it's like 100 meters long, that the root systems can be under where that patch is. So very aggressive plant species. And like Curtis said, no value to the ecosystem. That denseness of it is impacting our turtles, it's impacting our fish, and everything using that. And it's out competing our native species, which might be feeding them. Our Asian carp prevention program, just a shout out to DFO and Lujan, who's helped grant funding and stuff. So we do not have Asian carp, as far as we know, in the river. Because of this, we make excellent candidates for eDNA testing for the water. So this year, we are eDNA testing for DNA fragments of a potential carp, and we are going to continue doing that. And so that if there ever is DNA that shows up, we are able to get there and manage as soon as possible. And then the educating part is that, how do you get those kids to care? And same thing is, you keep telling them about frag and they're like, cool, frag. But so we kind of looked at that and we're like, how are we going to get the youth connected? How are we going to bring them back to the water? If they've never been on the water, if they're not experiencing it, then of course they're not going to care. And so we were able to get some canoes and canoe trip, and we went out this year, just our staff, and did the first loop to kind of see how it was. Terry had done it like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it'd been a while. So we went out and did that and got to be on the water. We camped right by some rapids, so we got to listen to it all night. And then we actually found a whole other patch of frag when we were canoeing. So we were like, wow, Asian carp and Phragmites. And then the protection piece. And we're planning, because if we're planning, that means we're ready in case anything happens. And so what is going to happen if there is an Asian carp? How are we going to respond? Are we going to be involved? And how can we help best make the decisions for the community, with the community, to combat this new thing of Asian carp and invasive species? So we're really excited about that. Our community member who also did all the art, Autumn Smith, Michigan Quay, did our logo art.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's magnets at the back. They're by donation. If you want to take one home, because they're pretty fancy. And then our nest incubation, which also has the numbers. So Claire, can you look through the clipboard? And whoever has the closest one.
1581. 1,581 eggs we've collected this year.
We did our nesting season usually in June. Kind of scared that it might start like mid-May this year. Who knows? It's a wild time. We went and did some nesting with Nipissing First Nation, and so Sophia and I went out. They have their own incubator. So 2 years ago, we went out for the first time, and there was this very beautiful sandy beach, Franks Bay. And there's turtles nesting, but there's four-wheelers and there's anthropogenic activity. And so like potentially protecting those eggs and then incubating them to release. So that was a really cool way that we were able to knowledge share and skill share. And they were able to take care of baby turtles and have this protection in case any of their development or any of those things impact nests. They're able to recover and house those baby turtles and hatch them out, which is really cool.
Yep.
We've been doing it. It occupies, if you ever want to come visit Meg and see baby turtles, plan your visits in August. We always have tons of groups that want to come out. It's lots of fun. You get to go back in waders and drop turtles off in all their little wetlands.
Yes, it's an amazing time.
Yep. I think that's it.
Oh, so did we get a number, Claire? Sorry.
And who?
See you.
For our financial partners who supported the conference today, a big Chimigwech Moose Deer Point, Chimigwech WPC, Chimigwech Greg Philbin, Chimigwech East Environment Climate Change Canada. Sorry, I met you in the bathroom. I'm sorry, where are you? Oh, hi. Chimigwech. Again, to all our door prize donors, big Chimigwech. It all goes back into you guys. And Chimigwech to our student sponsors, which I actually will have all our students come up now because I don't know where the cards are. Yeah. So anybody who had a student poster, Alice, Chris, Elena, Hope, do you want to come up for Mackenzie? Brooke, please come up. See. Oh, yeah, sorry, Rachel. I knew there was someone else. Chimigwech, Avision, Mitch, and Allison Fraser from Encompass Environmental. They directly sponsored that these students could have a little bit of financial assistance for coming today, bringing a poster, making it a little bit more fun, and a way for us to pick door prize winners. So Chimigwech. One sec, Samantha's getting their cards. And now you're probably all like, okay, what's the surprise? I don't know, a couple people, even some people from the team were like, what's the surprise? And I was like, it's this. And they were like, oh yeah, it's not the surprise, but it will be for you guys because as you might have known, Elena did leave us, or officially is leaving us, but she has started with the Firelight group. So after almost 5 years at Magnetawan First Nation, she's moved on to the Firelight group. She's not gone. She's gone from us, but not never. You never end a community, friendship, family. So we want to say a big bum up key, Elena, and she also has a few things she wants to come up and share. Okay, so I'm going to try and get through this without crying, but clearly it's already starting. Ani Bojo Kinawea. Oh no. Elena Smolars and Deshnikaz. Come on. Brantford and Donjaba, Perry Sound and Da, Denmark, Minawa, Poland, Ondandaze, Nindanoki, the Firelight group. I know it's weird to see me not in field clothes and sporting bug jackets that I'm clearly so excited about to sport while out in the field. I also want to admit that I wrote this late last night, but I've been thinking about what I wanted to say for a while. And although I'm going to be reading it, I wanted to choose my words carefully and know that it is still coming from my heart, even though it's coming from a piece of paper right now. So I just wanted to make sure that my words were meaningful. I also want to acknowledge this opportunity that the Mag Lands team has given me to speak briefly today, a day that's dedicated to learning and to sharing, and not sappy stories from past employees who clearly cannot keep it together. For those of you who don't know, I did start a new job at the Firelight Group after having worked at Magnetawan First Nation for nearly 5 years. So even after leaving this wonderful group, to know that I'm still welcome back to speak at these events is amazing, and it means so much to me. So Chimiwach, everybody. My relationship with the MFN Community and Lands Department team predated my role as SAR biologist and goes back to 2015 or 2016 when I was studying at McMaster University. The first day I visited Mag, I got to meet the lands manager at the time, Anthony LaForge. Tony, otherwise known as Uncle Dad. Talk about intimidating. If you've met Tony, the first time you meet him, it's usually like this. He stands like this, very intimidating. But over time, his eyebrows unfurrowed, his arms uncrossed, and his stance relaxed. And I had the honor of getting to know his kind soul and heart over the years. Luckily, the Lands Department took an official chance on me when I was hired in 2019. My first day was literally, I think, a week before this very conference when it was hosted at the Stocky Center in Perry Sound with the self-titled desk biologist, Corey Cosmic, at the helm. Talk about hitting the ground running. After having attended the conference in years prior, when it was hosted in the hall at Mag, which is a tradition I'm really happy to see returned with yesterday's sessions. I kind of knew what to expect, just not the behind the scenes chaos that was Corey running around trying to make sure that each table had a plant on it. The following years were some of the best, most chaotic, fulfilling, challenging, beautiful, and eye-opening years of my life. Years that I will cherish forever. One of the greatest joys of being part of guiding the Species at Risk program at Magnetawan was seeing the connections that so many members and visitors made with the turtles and snakes. Not only do our databases tell the stories of these turtles and snakes, how they've grown, where they've been, they hold our collective stories. Who found them? Who saved them from crossing Highway 69? How many turtles and snakes Theodore actually found while cruising around on his scooter during active season in the morning and evenings? Miigwech, Theodore. To help you understand, I figured I'd share some of the thoughts folks had and felt needed to be recorded about our Mexican and Ganebig relatives. Perfect, beautiful, cutie patootie, cutest bean I ever did see, found mating with 1L3R,
pooped on Elena. And of the snakes, feisty, almost stepped on her, snake pancake behavior, big boy. A personal favorite of mine from 2015, James, Ryan, and Terry, missing both back legs in the same pool as Nubby, the back legless painted turtle. Coincidence? I think not. Even the different names and initials that were part of the survey efforts, Glenda, Delana, Jen, Hannah, the McMaster crew, Santana, all these people and so many more, you are a part of that story. And I'm so thankful to have been a part of it as well. I encourage all future biologists, whether they're working at MAG or not, to look back and learn this story. Yes, it's about the data, but it's also about the story. I'm so grateful for these stories and memories of my own from the last 5 years. I know my time at MAG has not come to an end. Not only do I hope to see Crusher and Pretty Lady, maybe even Mr. Unicorn again, I hope I will never have to consider my time at MAG as ending. Because as I've learned, there are no goodbyes in Anishinaabe-Moan, because there's no need to say goodbye. Once you meet, you will always see each other again, whether in this life or the next. How beautiful a language to be so descriptive, intentional, and hold so much meaning and storytelling in single words, names, and sounds. The small parts of this language that I've had the privilege of learning, mostly thanks to unplanned office language sessions with Sam, is one of the ways my mind and heart have been opened to the richness and beauty of Anishinaabe culture. Although I would love to share with you all the incredible things I've learned over the years, I would be remiss not to spend my remaining time, hopefully I'm not going too over, speaking to the responsibility I've come to understand as a result of these teachings and experiences. I recognize now that I have a responsibility as a treaty person, living and working across the land that is not my own. Just like everyone in this room has a responsibility. To the non-Indigenous allies here today, do not wait for an invitation to speak up, to participate, to challenge the way things are done in your personal and professional lives. Start doing, keep learning, and continue to move forward, even if you're taken back a few steps along the way. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. To paraphrase Dr. Albert Marshall, whom many consider the father of Etowaptimunk, two-eyed seeing, and someone I am honored to have met last year, we are all responsible for reinforcing the concept that science will be used in conjunction with Indigenous knowledges. It's not just about what you know, but how you act upon it. It is now time for transformative action. Reconciliation without action is another empty promise. And not just reconciliation among people, but the land, Mother Earth. We have a privilege to use her gifts, but we're ignoring her rights, and our responsibilities as humans to acknowledge her rights. Again, I continue to speak to the non-Indigenous allies in the room. Two-eyed seeing is a journey, not a destination. No matter where you are in your learning journey, remember that relationships are the key to create opportunities for Indigenous ways of knowing. Clearly, someone wanted us to talk about relationships today, given how many people have touched on it, which I think is amazing. Not only relationships with each other, but relationships with the land, the water, non-human and non-living beings. As Albert described them, these are trees of peace and friendship. This engagement between us individuals and all beings of creation, in nations, in governance, Canadian institutes, research and education. These are the treaties that we can honor in our everyday lives. And just to give you an idea of all the amazing things that are committed to on top of these types of treaties, on top of these types of relationships and responsibilities, the things that Curtis spoke to, that Quinn spoke to, all the things that they do. Was anyone else just like, how the heck do they do all of these things? It's just something to remind you that the responsibilities that these communities have and the time that they take to uphold those on top of everything else they are asked to do. Remind yourselves of that, especially when you go to engage with communities. Hold that with you. The last thing I'll say is a concept that Albert's late wife, Dr. Moderna Marshall, developed as part of workshops for cultural sensitivity and cultural humility. Think of Indigenous ways of life and knowing as a circle with many circles inside, like layers. At the center, the inner circle is where We, as non-Indigenous people, step back. It is not our place to extract this knowledge. It cannot and should not be translated because it's not for us to understand. Instead, we need to acknowledge that it exists and acknowledge its value alongside, and in some cases above, Western science. Thank you to those I consider my teachers. Samantha Naganash, seriously, this woman needs to be recognized for her incredible knowledge sharing and ability to have such deep conversations at the most random of times. Almost there. Theodore Pitawanakwit, Miptone, Cheryl Judge, Theodore Flamand, James and Julia, Christine King, the boys, Darian, Delson, Chris, and Thunder, Nikki Commanda, Andy Albert, Jesse Pop. I feel like I'm at the Grammys and I'm listing off everybody that I hope I don't forget. And to my non-human teachers, the turtles, the snakes, the trees, the water, miigwech, 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 miigwech. And to the one and only Richard Naganash, who I'm very glad is back. I don't know how to express in words how much you mean to me, how much you challenge me in the best ways. And how much I've learned from you. Oh boy. To be a good protector. And to live up to the name that you gave me. But I will cherish our friendship for as long as you'll keep me around. Wamapi Kawabamin. Miigwech.
We low-key tricked him to get up here already. The man, the myth, the Sasquatch. Mr. Richard Naganash.
What are we doing up here?
We're giving you some recognition that you very, very deeply deserve. Richard is our elder advisor. He's the cat that's almost passed on us. I don't know how many times. And you mean a terrible amount to our team. You come into our office every day. We're so busy and you're like, actually, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to take the boys to do. And we're like, okay, how are we going to make this work? You push us. And you're here for us in every single capacity. You take all our students under their wings. And just so you know, Kate and Claire, who did their masters, were coined the Sasquatches for the really long time because they used to run around in the bush. And we want to gift you. Chimiigwech for how you've changed your entire life to be here to help guide us, influence us, teach us how to connect with the land and how to be us. Miigwech. You want to say it? Okay.
Yeah, I've been working here at the First Nation for quite a while. Oh, different places I did at the First Nation. Then I got into the lands department. I don't know how many years ago that is now. It's quite a while. Get ready. Then I retired. But then I ended up back in here to help out the girls. And they needed somebody to help them, so I helped them all the time. I could tell you, when I started, my hair was all black. All these women working here drove my hair all white. But that's been 5 years now. I've been working with most of them. It was a lot of fun. We learned a lot of things from each other. I them some stuff, and I learned stuff from them. So if we have some kind of a problem or something, we always find some kind of found a little how to fix it out. We could fix the question. We got it. We'd get it right. It's a bad, kind of a sad day today. But lands has to keep on going. I know we'll be missing one member, but she's not far from us. She's 40 minutes away from us. Well, I will see her someplace. I know she will pop up into the First Nation, to the last department. She'll probably make a few surprise businesses on us, but hey, that'll be a good day. That'll be a good day when she shows up there. Lana, thanks for everything. 5 years of torturing me sometimes. But we almost got it in. Lana, thanks for everything. Thank you. Oh, still here.
And last but not least, today is a very special day. Nobody knows it. Terry Jones, where are you going? We have a very special song that we would like to sing today. And I'd like to bring up our backup musical talent is here. I volunteered to sing. I apologize. I have no training. Everyone ready? Yes. Okay, let's go. 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Terry. Happy birthday to you. Weren't they amazing, guys? So now after Manic Sam has cried and laughed, I have to say Bama P to everybody else. Thank you guys all so much for being here and for spending today with us and for just going through the little bit of crazy that we had at the end here. I really appreciate all of the messages that were sent today. I really appreciate all of the people in the room who are here to hear it and are here to learn with us. It's been just another year for the Mag Lands Department growing and learning with all of you, and we appreciate you all so much. I look forward to another year of learning and growing with you and continuing on in these relationships that we have. I'm so excited for the people that I've met today. Yeah, and so thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Terry, for being born. Didn't even know I could kazoo like that. But yeah, Chimigwech to all of you for being here for us. And I suppose we'll see you all at our 10th annual next year.